A swarm of creatures bowed down in deep submission, frantically offering their sincere apologies and demanding an urgent family meeting in honor of the Sage of the Rainbow. Amidst the absurdity, a single, haunting question echoed through the darkness of his mind. Why did he even exist? Around him stood a group of extraordinary companions. Claude, heralded as the strongest hero in history. Sophia, a brilliant witch skilled in every form of magic. Mary, an agile thief who could bypass any trap. And Meryl, a devout priestess capable of healing any wound. Standing united before him, their impressive presence and undisputed talents left no doubt that they were a party worthy of legendary heroes. By contrast, he sat isolated atop a desolate cliff, consumed by the painful realization that he possessed no extraordinary gifts and felt like a useless burden dragging them down. Yet despite his total lack of special combat abilities, he found himself resting his head in the lap of the priestess while the other women gathered around, smothering him with affectionate care. Flustered by their overwhelming attention, he shouted for them to stop messing around. But his outburst only prompted Meryl to softly offer more comfort, Mary to eagerly offer a massage, and Sophia to present a freshly brewed potion to soothe his fatigue. Scrambling to his feet, he pointed out that they shouldn't be slacking off, reminding them that Claude was still out scouting the surrounding area. To his absolute shock, the legendary hero suddenly stormed back into view, passionately asserting that he too deserved the honor of tending to Cross's well-being. He praised Cross for defeating 50 monsters that day, even while casually pointing out that the rest of the party had slaughtered well over 150. Hearing such comparison left the young sage feeling deeply insecure, wondering why they cared so much about someone with so few redeeming qualities, though he quietly resolved to work even harder. Eager to make himself useful, he set his sights on the surrounding forest, deciding to forage for dinner ingredients before darkness fell. As he prepared to venture out, the energetic young thief instantly offered to tag along, but he politely turned her down, insisting he could handle the task alone while she rested. Accepting his wishes with reluctance, the hero sternly implored him to remain careful, his intense gaze revealing an almost suffocating level of concern. Once the young man vanished into the tree line, a quiet stillness briefly settled over the companions standing at the edge of the woods. The moment he was out of earshot, their stern composure completely dissolved into adoration, with the priestess swooning over how impossibly endearing he was. Their enthusiasm quickly escalated into a chaotic exchange of praises as they squealed over his flushed face, his heroic bravery in battle, and coveted moments spent alone by his side. Their admiration devolved into intense rivalry, each boasting fervently about every tiny gesture of affection they had received from him, until a terrifying aura erupted around them. Deeper in the forest, the distant sound of massive explosions barely registered to Cross, who simply smiled to himself, assuming his powerful allies were engaging in some energetic evening training. He trekked through the dense forest, musing on how fiercely the Demon King's forces had fought earlier that day. Assuming his companions were utterly drained from the combat, he resolved to push himself even harder to lift their spirits. Meanwhile, back at the campsite, the party was spiraling into wild panic over his absence. Fearful thoughts raced through their minds, each growing increasingly frantic that he might have been ambushed or kidnapped. As their panic peaked with absurd ideas of setting the whole forest ablaze to locate him, the young sage calmly stepped out from the foliage, offering a polite apology for his delay. Before he could finish explaining himself, the rest of the group surrounded him with tear-streaked eyes, demanding to know where he had gone. In response to their frantic concern, he proudly unveiled an extraordinary bounty: a massive roasted bear, fresh mountain greens, fruits, and fish, explaining he had simply been gathering ingredients for a hearty feast. The sheer warmth and scale of his gesture struck all four of them simultaneously, leaving the entire party completely swooning in silent adoration. Chagrin at having caused them worry once again, he rubbed his neck bashfully, while his companions declared that his boundless kindness alone was enough to fill their hearts before digging in. A spread of savory grilled fish, skewered meats, and rich herbal broth sat ready, filling the camp with an intoxicating aroma. Savoring the meal, the thief enthusiastically declared his cooking vastly superior to royal court cuisine, while the witch quietly pondered how impossible it would be to ever return to normal food once their journey was over. Hearing their praise, he smiled warmly with a ladle in hand, casually reassuring them that their worries were unfounded, promising to keep cooking for them even after their quest came to an end. As his companions continued to marvel at his culinary talents, the heroic knight happily munched on a piece of food, casually declaring that if it were prepared by his devoted friend, he would gladly eat poisonous mushrooms. The lively thief shrieked in protest, pointing out that she had just picked that piece herself. With the evening meal concluded, a voice reminded everyone of their early schedule the following morning, urging the party to settle in for the night. As silence settled over the quiet forest camp, the tired companions drifted off into a deep slumber inside their tents, murmuring words of praise for their hard-working provider in their sleep. In their dreams, each of them remained fixated on him, whispering warm, affectionate thoughts and gentle scoldings into the quiet night air. Yet, outside the tents, an empty bedroll lay undisturbed in the grass, revealing that he was nowhere to be found. Deep in the woods, he was pushing his body to its absolute limits, swinging his sword with fierce intensity. Driven by a desperate inner turmoil, he told himself that cooking alone would never be enough to protect his friends, refusing to remain weak and helpless. Staring out into the night sky with burning resolve, he swore to himself that he would grow strong enough to stand as an equal beside his comrades on the battlefield, completely refusing to abandon his oath. By the time morning arrived, the hero observed the camp and inquired about his absent friend, only for the nimble thief to casually point toward the tree-line and explain that he was off training as always. Hearing this, the party's mage and priestess exchanged worried glances, noting how he pushed himself tirelessly through every single night, knowing he would inevitably return battered and bruised once more. Looking on silently, the heroic knight quietly wished that his devoted companion would simply confide in them and admit just how difficult his struggle truly was. He bitterly declared that if the pressure ever proved too much for Cross, they could simply abandon the world altogether, though his companion reminded him that Cross was far too resilient to ever voice such weakness. Softening his gaze, the hero agreed, resolving that the party would shield Cross from harm no matter the cost, even if it meant laying down their lives. With their resolve firmly set, the party resumed their trek through dark caverns, emerging safely into the light as their journey pressed forward without further mishap. Across their travels, they cut through relentless hordes of wild beasts to defend defenseless settlements, slowly building a legend in every town they touched. One by one, they systematically tore through the Demon King's fortresses, liberating enslaved lands and leaving victory in their wake. As dark strongholds fell, total triumph for humanity finally came within reach, driving the group onward toward the heart of the enemy's dominion. With the defeat of the final Heavenly King, the formidable obstacles before them vanished, prompting the young hero to turn toward Cross with fierce satisfaction, declaring that only one final foe remained. Hearing that only the Demon King himself stood between them and peace, Cross smiled with earnest relief, eager at last to free the world's people from endless suffering. Shortly thereafter, their travels brought them to a thriving human city, its sprawling rooftops bathing serenely in the daylight. As the party entered the town square, an enthusiastic crowd surged forward to cheer their savior heroes, shouting praises and clamoring for a glimpse of the legendary champions. He was greeted with joyous enthusiasm as the ruler of the realm welcomed the party with open arms, singing his praises for making the long journey. In response to the royal reception, the young swordsman bowed out of respect, expressing his gratitude, though the king quickly insisted there was no need for such formality. Maintaining a steadfast resolve, he made it clear that their stay would be brief, declaring that as soon as preparations were complete, they would march to slay the Demon King. The ruler warmly agreed, assuring them the kingdom would provide every resource needed while urging the heroic party to rest, though his eyes cast a subtle, sidelong glance at the quiet companion standing beside them. Noticing the young man clutching his shoulder in quiet exhaustion, the monarch observed aloud that he seemed to be bearing an extraordinarily heavy burden. Stepping outside into the bustling streets, the young sage was immediately met with a barrage of cruel murmurs from the onlookers, who openly ridiculed his presence and deemed him a useless burden on the hero. Hurt by the venomous whispers, he pulled his cloak tight, coming to the painful realization that even in this distant kingdom, the harsh judgment of the people remained unchanged. Seeing his companions trembling with terrifying rage, Cross frantically raised his hands to calm them down before their anger boiled over. Despite his desperate pleas to hold back until they reached the inn, Claude marched ahead with a murderous glare, virtually dragging the boy along. Once inside their quarters, the hero casually announced his intention to wipe out an entire kingdom, drawing an immediate reprimand from Mary for treating slaughter like a tavern visit. He gently attempted to mediate, pointing out that the king was not entirely wrong and warning that reacting to every minor insult would only lead to endless conflict. In response, his leader turned with a warm, earnest smile, confessing that it was only because of his presence that he was capable of being a hero. The rest of the party gathered behind their leader, silently confirming that his quiet dedication was the glue binding their legendary group together. Hearing those unexpected words of trust, he froze in surprise, a sense of quiet gratitude washing over him. Gazing at the dependable backs of his companions, he reaffirmed his inner resolve, swearing to find whatever ways he could to support them in the trials ahead. As the priestess and thief reflected on how quickly their year-long journey had flown by, the landscape outside dramatically shifted to jagged, ominous peaks under a tempestuous sky. Standing before the dark fortress, he looked up in awe and trepidation at the imposing gates, realizing their quest had finally brought them to the Demon King's castle. He wondered aloud about what lay beyond their final battle, pointing out that their leader would likely assume the crown upon returning to the kingdom, before asking what the others planned to do once peace was restored. Surprised by his assumption that the women wished to marry the hero, the group quickly set the record straight. The thief planned to rejoin her guild, the magician intended to continue her magic research alongside him, and the priestess spoke of joining the church. Considering his own options, he contemplated the quiet possibilities ahead, like opening a diner or taking a peaceful journey, until the hero asked him directly what he intended to do. In response, the hero proposed a simple celebration, suggesting that the two of them return home and share drinks straight through until morning. His eyes lit up with unbridled enthusiasm at the idea of celebrating their victory together. Before the two could finalize their private plans, the women interjected loudly, insisting on joining the festivities and prompting him to happily declare that everyone would party all night long. Fueled by high spirits and shared camaraderie, the unified party charged forward into the stronghold, ready to defeat the Demon King once and for all. Silence hung heavy within the vaulted stone corridors of the inner sanctum as they approached their final destination. Stepping into the grand chamber, they confronted a brooding figure seated high upon the dark throne awaiting their arrival. The skeletal lord taunted the hero, acknowledging his reputation for slaying monster subordinates and promising that his life would soon come to a bloody end as well. He bellowed a roar of defiance, challenging the adventuring party to step forward into battle. Spurred by the enemy's taunt, the group launched a coordinated assault, combining magic and steel. Focusing her mana, Sophia locked her gaze onto the target with lethal precision. A fiery magical explosion rocked the chamber as Mary zipped past the monster to confuse his defenses. Capitalizing on the distraction, Claude lunged forward on cue, driving his glowing blade into the ruler's chest. The lethal strike pierced cleanly through bone armor, leaving Cross frozen in awe at the sheer speed of the execution. Collapsing to the floor, the Dark Lord acknowledged the hero's strength before Claude turned to Cross to announce their victory. Instead of celebrating with Claude, the women immediately swarmed Cross, seeking his praise and affection. Observing their strange behavior, Cross felt a sudden sense of dread as a bizarre realization began to take shape. In that single, chilling instant, the true reality of his world was laid bare. He took a decisive step, lunging forward with every ounce of speed he possessed. Throwing his body in front of Claude, he took the fatal strike meant for the hero, blood spraying as the blade sliced across his back. As blood welled at the corner of his lips, a faint, contented smile touched his face, convinced that his entire life had been leading to this singular sacrifice. Nearby, the lingering head of the defeated Demon King spat out a final curse, warning that the endless cycle of hatred between their kinds would never cease. Panic instantly erupted through the group as Claude screamed his name in despair, while Meryl rushed forward frantically, desperate to weave her restorative spells. Supporting his slumping frame, Mary realized in horror that the Demon King's lingering curse was corrupting the air, rendering any healing magic entirely ineffective. Held tight in the hero's trembling embrace, he looked up with fading strength, wondering aloud why Claude would weep so deeply for a humble companion like him. Desperate to save him, Claude tried to press a healing potion to his lips while weeping that a world without him was unbearable, though he gently confessed he could no longer swallow it. A quiet, serene expression settled over his face as a single tear glided down his cheek. Seeing the entire party weeping over his fading life, a final warm thought filled his mind, feeling truly blessed to be so deeply cherished by them all. He offered a weak, bittersweet smile as his vision began to fade, expressing his final regret that he couldn't do more to help his friends. His hand slumped limp onto the cold stone, trailing into a pool of dark blood as the last faint breath left his body. In that quiet hall, his companions wept around his lifeless form, marking the tragic end of Sage Cross Vish. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving behind a vast void drifting with distant flecks of light as his consciousness faded away. Within this dark expanse, time seemed to lose all meaning while the remaining embers of his soul floated aimless and still. Then, a distant voice echoed through the endless void, softly calling out his title into the darkness. His eyes snapped open as the voice resounded again, invoking his full name and pulling him back from oblivion. Upon sitting up in a grand hall, he found a massive horde of terrifying monsters bowing low before him, desperately pleading for forgiveness. He stared in utter bewilderment as it was explained that the Demon King's curse had not slain him, but had instead forced his soul to reincarnate as a monster bound to live in the demon realm. He could only utter a clueless sound of disbelief, completely dumbfounded by the bizarre turn his fate had taken. Awakening to a bewildering sight, Cross gasped as he found himself surrounded by scores of monstrous beasts bowed low before him. A terrible realization seized him. He wondered if he had somehow been reincarnated into the body of a monster. Panicking as he surveyed his unfamiliar surroundings, he blurted out in utter confusion, demanding to know where on earth he was and what could possibly be happening. Staring in disbelief at the sea of creatures groveling at his feet, he recalled how he and his comrades had successfully defeated the Demon King, only for him to perish immediately after. Yet, despite his death, here he was, inexplicably alive and faced with this absurd spectacle. Taking in the overwhelming view of the subservient horde, he tried to organize his thoughts, realizing how precarious his situation was without any solid information. His mind naturally turned to his companions, wondering if Claude and the rest of the party were safe, when a sudden voice interrupted his inner turmoil, politely asking for forgiveness for speaking out of turn. Turning around in shock, he was stunned to see a young, horn-bearing girl with a regal cloak step forward and introduce herself as Aura Feel, the current Demon King. Seeing his alarm, she quickly raised her hands, reassuring him that she had no intention of causing him harm and addressing him respectfully as a sage. He blinked in bewilderment, completely unaware of who this supposed sage was, and insisted she must have mistaken him for someone else, until she pointedly asked if he was indeed Cross. She elaborated further, clarifying whether he was Cross, the famed rainbow sage of the hero party, a dramatic title that left him internally cringing and bewildered by its grandiosity. Standing solemnly in memory, he was remembered as the vital mediator and harmonizer who had stood alongside the hero's party, the ordinary man who managed to defeat the Demon King despite possessing no special powers whatsoever. He vehemently protested, shouting that phrasing it like that made him sound like useless dead weight. Shaking off the absurdity of the situation, he demanded that the young Demon King clearly explain what was actually going on. In response to his outburst, Aura bowed deeply in apology, admitting it was a case of mistaken identity. She explained that the previous Demon King had attempted a spell to reincarnate the hero into a monster to control him, but because Cross had shielded the hero, the plan malfunctioned, reincarnating Cross into a monster instead. To help him grasp his new reality, she handed him a small, decorated mirror, advising that one look at his reflection would clarify everything. Taking the glass with a heavy sigh, he admitted his quiet desire to return to his former life. Staring into the mirror, he recoiled in sheer disbelief, shouting out at the startling sight before him. He was completely overwhelmed by his new, unexpectedly sharp appearance, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Astonished by his reflection, he blurted out that he looked vastly cooler than he ever had before, asking if such a look was considered ugly among monster kind. Aura quickly reassured him, offering her gentle opinion that he possessed a rather handsome face. Despite his admiration for his new look, she reminded him that he had been reborn as a monster, the natural enemy of humanity. He considered her words thoughtfully, realizing that he didn't actually hold any deep-seated hatred or grudge against monsters. Moved by his lack of hostility, she mistook his calm acceptance for tragic resolve and dramatically declared her readiness to be slain by his hand, bracing herself for whatever punishment he deemed fit. Amused by her sudden dramatic stance, he offered a warm and reassuring smile, asking why he would ever dream of killing her when she had done nothing wrong. Lowering her guard, she mentioned that 10 years had passed since his death, making his confusion perfectly understandable. He paused in surprise at the timeline, contemplating his bizarre situation and wondering aloud how old he technically was if he had been reincarnated as a newborn monster. Just as he attempted to inquire about the fate of Claude and his former companions, his stomach let out a loud, thunderous rumble. Hearing his hunger, she giggled pleasantly and suggested they get something to eat before continuing their conversation. He marveled at the lavish spread laid out before him, taking in the rich aroma and exquisite presentation of the demon realm's cuisine. Digging in without hesitation, he found every bite shockingly delicious, while Aura gently reminded him to savor his very first meal since his rebirth. Overwhelmed by the sheer quality of the dishes, he playfully admitted that being reborn as a monster was worth it just for the food, prompting Aura to agree that human culinary arts paled in comparison. As he swallowed another bite, his thoughts turned back to his old companions, wishing they could taste such flavors. Aura assured him more could be served immediately, much to the silent excitement of the maid nearby. Over tea, his mood shifted to sober reflection as a stark truth dawned on him, that humanity had not defeated the monsters through inherent superiority, but solely through the terrifying prowess of the hero. Stepping out onto the balcony afterward, he looked down in astonishment at the sprawling, vibrant city thriving beneath the palace walls. Joining him at the railing, Aura stood alongside him as they both gazed out over the majestic heart of the demon realm. Observing the lively cobblestone avenues and peaceful citizens below, he admitted that the capital appeared even grander than the human kingdom he had once defended. Fully accepting his new existence, he declared his intent to live as a monster, though a shadow of doubt prompted him to ask if he would be forced to fight humans, to which Aura calmly reassured him he would not. With a soft, gentle expression warming her face, she leaned in slightly and confessed that she held a deeply cherished dream for the future. She spoke of establishing trade relations between monsters and humans, her voice quiet, yet filled with unwavering conviction. Continuing her passionate declaration, the young demon ruler outlined her grandest goal, creating a world where humans and monsters would no longer fight, leaving Cross completely spellbound by her vision. The thought of a world without conflict echoed powerfully in his mind, striking a deep chord within his heart. Memories surfaced of his former companions gathered around campfires, recalling how that very same peaceful future was what they had all originally strived for. Even though Claude had parted ways with their original ideals, Cross realized there was still something meaningful he could accomplish to honor that dream. Turning his gaze back toward the young demon king, he called out her name with firm resolve. Leaning forward with a bright, enthusiastic smile, he offered to lend his strength to help make her wonderful dream a reality. Taken aback by his words, she pressed her hands to her chest and confessed that no one had ever offered her such warm support, agreeing to work together as they extended their hands toward one another. Grasping his hand firmly on the sunlit balcony, she earnestly asked him to lend her his strength from this day forward. Beyond the balcony, a long winding path stretched across the serene hills, setting the stage for a grand new journey toward lasting peace. A group of travelers clad in ornate armor and robes quietly ascends a grassy hillside towards a solitary gravestone inscribed with the name Cross Vish. Standing before the headstone with a large bouquet of flowers, the hero breaks the silence, noting that 10 years and 184 days have passed since Cross left them. Around him, the female party members fondly recall their past travels and Cross's cooking, reflecting on how frequently they visit his resting place while wondering if he is truly happy. But his expression turns bitter as a darker emotion takes root, questioning aloud why Cross had to leave them behind. With his fury boiling over, he turns his gaze toward the sky and announces their dark resolve to exterminate all monsters, even knowing Cross would never have wanted such bloodshed. Determined to eradicate every monster from the world Cross died to protect, the hero party sets themselves on a collision course with their former friend, who is now building a peaceful realm for monsters. To chart a path forward, Cross realizes he must first understand the demons, but he is immediately overwhelmed by a chorus of voices incessantly addressing him as Sage Soa. Unable to bear the deafening commotion any longer, he claps his hands over his ears and yells at them to be quiet, unable to process anything amid the noise. Later, sitting alone on his bed, he is plagued by severe self-doubt, questioning what a sage even is and concluding that he cannot possibly live up to such grand expectations. As he lies there staring at the ceiling, another fundamental question dawns on him. What exactly is his own race? Seeking clarity, he consults Aura, who reveals that he is of the Necronia race, a hybrid of undead and demon, leaving him in utter shock to discover that he is technically dead. She elaborates that he corresponds to those reanimated through magical power, noting that the undead encompass various distinct categories. However, she warns him that as a mixed breed, he is not immortal and must not overexert himself. Hearing this, his hopes of having a combat advantage evaporate, leaving him deflated while she hurriedly attempts to reassure him. He considered testing his newly discovered abilities, but the demon ruler across the table warned him not to overexert himself, noting that the legendary Necronia race had very little written history. Ancient tales depicted the Necronia as formidable pioneers who tamed the wild demon lands and established enduring peace, revered across generations as legendary heroes. Realizing the staggering weight of expectations meant for the true hero, he clenched his fist with quiet determination, knowing he had to give his absolute best to live up to such a monumental legacy. Just as the demon ruler tried to reassure him that these legends shouldn't cause him distress, a firm knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Knight Libel entered the room abruptly, immediately voicing her intense distrust and declaring that humans were treacherous creatures who should never be allowed near their ruler. Though the sovereign quickly came to his defense by reminding her knight that he was a fellow victim of the previous demon lord, the sharp insults still stung his pride deeply. Unyielding in her hostility, the warrior pointed accusingly, shouting that humans inevitably deceive and betray, and that he would eventually turn his blade against the demon lord. With tears of intense emotion welling in her eyes, she insisted that she was the only one who truly belonged by her master's side, exposing the fierce devotion underlying her outburst. Drawing her sword with a menacing aura, she violently demanded proper respect for her ruler, prompting him to sweat nervously and ask his host how to handle such extreme behavior. Rather than scolding the aggressive knight, the demon sovereign simply offered a light-hearted apology, chuckling that such fierce loyalty to one's master was ultimately a commendable quality. As he listened to the knight's hostility, Libel suddenly smirked, declaring she had a brilliant idea to test his trustworthiness before the citizens of the demon realm. Pointing a commanding finger directly at the young human, she formally challenged him to a duel. Leaning close with a menacing glare, the knight urged him to win and prove his worth if he dared to claim the title of sage, leaving him utterly speechless. Hearing the absurd demand, Aura immediately intervened in shock, refusing to allow such an unfair contest. To everyone's surprise, Cross stood firm and accepted the duel, knowing that unless he gained the demon realm's genuine respect, he could never truly support Aura's dream of peace, despite her frantic pleas to stop. News of the match spread swiftly, drawing vast crowds of diverse demon spectators into a grand arena, buzzing with intense excitement. Watching from the royal stands amidst vendor stalls and high stakes, Aura fretted over the trouble Cross had been dragged into, even as the impressionable crowds placed their hopes and bets on the famed sage. As the maid questioned whether allowing the match was wise, Aura reflected on Cross's past in the human realm, where his former companions had cruelly branded him as useless dead weight. The maid solemnly noted the overwhelming odds, pointing out that Libel was a legendary warrior whose prowess once rivaled the former demon lord's strongest generals, leaving virtually no hope for a human victory. Down on the arena floor, the battle lines were drawn as the intimidating knights stepped into the ring, leaving Aura with no choice but to watch and trust in whatever strength her companion truly possessed. He immediately regretted his posturing as he looked out over the unexpectedly massive crowd gathered for the match. Taunting him with a stern glare, the armored knight mocked his hesitant expression, warning him that his performance directly affected the demon lord's honor before the referee dropped the signal flag to commence the fight. With the match officially underway, the warrior closed the distance in a fraction of a second, her sword swinging down with ferocious speed that caught him completely off guard. The relentless flurry of attacks left him struggling just to track her movements, his eyes widening in shock at her unbelievable swiftness. Realizing he couldn't survive a prolonged exchange at close range, he leaped back sharply to put some space between them. However, she pursued him effortlessly, taunting him for retreating despite holding the lofty title of sage. To his dismay, he realized her prowess was not limited to physical combat alone, as dark magical energy suddenly began coalescing around her. Flaunting a cluster of floating dark orbs in her palm, she gleefully reminded him that magic was fair game in this arena. Bombarding him with consecutive magical blasts, she shouted that no hero was present to shield him this time as he scrambled frantically to avoid the devastating barrage. Watching from the royal balcony, the demon lord pondered whether she should have intervened, reflecting on how his keen eyes, honed by observing the grandest battles alongside heroes, allowed him to perceive every rapid movement despite his desperation. She maintained a calm demeanor, acknowledging the harsh reality of the demon realm where weakness or carrying burdens could prove fatal. She recognized the truth in that moment. Despite his lack of high-level offensive magic, he was indeed a genuine member of the hero's party, having conditioned himself through sheer exertion to keep pace with the world's elite fighters. Locking his gaze onto the incoming barrage, he realized he could trace every movement with perfect clarity, preparing to turn the tide and launch his counterattack at last. The crowd murmured in shock at the sheer scale of destructive magic unfolding before them, fearful that the battle would end in a completely one-sided massacre. Meanwhile, Cross gritted his teeth, inwardly questioning if a sage was truly ill-suited for direct combat, while Aura watched in quiet contemplation. Dismissing her opponent's combat ability, Libel declared that the duel would end using magic alone, deeming the encounter utterly tedious as she continued her assault while Cross scrambled across the ground. Seeing small projectiles heading her way, she initially braced for a counterattack, only to dismissively realize that Cross was merely tossing small pebbles in her direction. As thick clouds of dust and smoke enveloped the arena, she scoffed at his pathetic attempts, believing he could do nothing more than hide and desperately endure the barrage. Yet through the haze, a barrage of small stones cut through the air at high speed, hurled steadily toward her position. Easily deflecting the harmless pebbles, she taunted him, asking what purpose buying time served when his attacks couldn't leave a single scratch, before unleashing another devastating wave of magic to clear her path. The spell detonated with a deafening roar, enveloping the battleground in a massive burst of flame and smoke. Dashing directly through the thick smoke left by the blast, Cross closed the distance in a flash. Libel taunted him for using her own explosion as cover, mocking his desperate rush as nothing more than entering his own grave. As he lunged forward, she struck back viciously, her blade slicing deeply across his flesh. Blood sprayed into the air, yet rather than retreating from the agonizing blow, he used the moment to seize control of her arm. Seeing his decisive gambit play out, Aura nodded in quiet approval. Holding her locked in place despite his injuries, he pointed out that her overconfidence had caused her to swing her sword too wide. Taking advantage of her overextended position, he disarmed the astonished knight in one swift movement, leaving Claude watching in absolute shock from the stands. Dropping to one knee from exhaustion, he turned the captured weapon directly against its owner. Libel stood completely frozen, paralyzed by the sudden realization that the duel was over. Her eyes widened in utter disbelief, unable to process how her overwhelming magic had failed against a clever bait-and-switch tactic. With a heavy thud, the conflict reached its decisive end as a stunned silence hung thick over the entire arena. Before Libel could protest or try to reclaim her weapon, Aura raised her voice across the Colosseum, officially declaring an end to the match and announcing Cross as the victor. Attendants quickly restrained the furious knight as she shouted in protest, refusing to accept her defeat. Meanwhile, he slumped forward on the arena floor, breathing a heavy sigh of relief that his risky strategy had succeeded. Standing slowly amidst the arena, he listened as the entire crowd erupted into wild chants of his title. The spectators celebrated passionately in the stands, praising his tactical genius and celebrating the victory of the hero party's sage. He stood silently as the noise of the arena faded, gazing back across the empty grounds where the intense duel had just concluded. Clenching a hand against his chest, a deep sense of relief washed over him as he reflected on his past experiences, realizing that none of his previous effort had been wasted. A quiet, genuine smile broke across his bruised face, savoring the personal triumph of the battle. Shortly after, inside the infirmary, the young Demon King burst through the doors with wide, anxious eyes to check on his condition. Sitting casually on his cot, he lightly insisted his severed hand would regenerate, but she scolded him sharply for his recklessness, panicking over whether such extreme damage could truly heal completely. Presenting the small new hand sprouting from his arm, he marveled at its rapid regrowth despite its miniature size, leaving his companion stunned by his absurd regenerative capability. Moments later, the defeated knight stormed into the room, pacing back and forth in agonized frustration over how she could have suffered a loss. While the proud warrior fiercely maintained that she possessed superior strength, the Demon King dismissed her as a sore loser, though the young sage surprisingly agreed with his former opponent's assessment. He explained that his victory came entirely from exploiting the natural carelessness inherent to powerful combatants, a weakness he noted that even their formidable rival possessed, though he himself had never managed to overcome him in fight. Poking his small, developing fingers, he humbly reminded them that he had only won by sacrificing his left hand, acknowledging the knight's true strength while both onlookers listened in quiet contemplation. He leaned forward in the room, breaking the silence to ask the young knight whether she was finally ready to place her trust in him after witnessing his sacrifice. Gritting her teeth in reluctant acceptance, she conceded that while she acknowledged his sheer combat ability, she was still loath to give him full credit. Unbothered by her pride, he enthusiastically offered to lend his aid to the Demon King's workload. Amused by his bizarre yet admirable eagerness, the ruler reminded him that he was under no obligation to take on such burdens, yet he remained firm, asserting that he had promised to support her dream of unity. Seeing his unwavering resolve, the knight turned back toward her lord and suggested that perhaps they could entrust a pressing issue directly to him. Weighing the suggestion carefully, the Demon King voiced her reservations, explaining that the assignment carried immense risk and that he might not be ready, though she conceded that no other candidate was available for the duty. Elaborating on the crisis, she revealed that despite her policy of peaceful coexistence between humans and demons, a dangerous faction of dissidents firmly opposed her rule. This lingering threat was composed of hardcore remnants from the former regime, whose gathering forces posed an immediate danger of inciting a violent coup. Turning to him, the ruler formally requested that he suppress these insurgents, but insisted that the reluctant knight accompany him, prompting her to cry out in protest while he calmly accepted the mission as unavoidable. Setting out shortly thereafter, the paired companions reached a high cliff overlooking a rugged valley, successfully identifying the enemy's hidden encampment nestled among the distant peaks. Marveling at a vessel of steaming warm food, he reflects on how remarkable the demon lord's enchanted tableware is, wishing he had possessed such luxury during his previous journeys. His quiet moment is rudely interrupted as Libel confronts him, demanding to know why he is relaxing so close to the enemy base and warning him not to grow soft after inheriting the demon lord's will. He calmly hands her a bowl, pointing out that no warrior can fight on an empty stomach and inviting her to eat. She takes a cautious bite with her eating utensils, scoffing at first at what she considers a meager meal. Her stern composure instantly dissolves into pure delight as the flavors hit her, and she eagerly demands another serving while he chuckles at her sudden change of heart. She excitedly declares that he should become a royal chef for the demon lord, though he dismisses her self-serving praise and decides to return to scouting duties. Looking out over the surrounding terrain toward the enemy hideout, he weighs his options, hoping to gather enough intelligence to settle matters without entering a violent conflict. Peering through his spyglass, he observes a lone figure emerging from the stronghold, only to freeze in utter shock when the terrifying entity seems to detect his gaze from immense distance. Realizing the immediate danger, he called out to his ally to fall back at once. Before he could even turn to flee, a menacing shadow materialized right beside him with a sinister grin. In that fraction of a second, he recalled the Demon King's warning about the enemy's lightning-fast leader, horrified by how rapidly the threat had closed the distance. Standing before them was Gustar, a legendary centaur warrior known as Faster Than the Wind, who mockingly greeted the renowned young sage. Looking beyond the centaur, they realized the surrounding village was teeming with hostile beast folk and monsters watching their every move. Caught deep within enemy territory, he assessed the mounting danger, knowing a single hostile action could trigger a relentless assault from the crowd. As his knightly companion reached for her blade in defiance, he sharply commanded her to hold back, reminding her that provoking a battle went against their lord's instructions. He patiently explained that achieving unity between humans and monsters was already an immense challenge, and internal conflict among monster factions would destroy any hope of lasting peace. Turning his attention directly to the centaur commander, he questioned what could drive him to oppose the Demon King's peaceful vision. The centaur proudly declared that his desire to run unhindered across the continent meant complete eradication of humanity, leaving the young sage stunned by such extreme malice. He argued passionately that the biological power gap between monsters and humans was far too wide. Humans, he claimed, would never accept such an imbalance and would inevitably try to control monster strength in the name of equality, the exact opposite of his ideal freedom. His uncompromising stance left the young sage silent, his dark eyes narrowing as he carefully calculated a way through the impasse. He watched as the surrounding monster horde cheered in agreement while the beast leader insisted that humans were inherently treacherous. Libel desperately interjected, pleading with the centaur to remember that he was supposed to be on their side. He mockingly declared that if anyone wished to command him, they would need to present someone faster than him, if such a person even existed. Spotting a narrow opportunity, the young warrior boldly proposed a race, declaring that if he won, the beast leader would have to obey his word. His proposal immediately ignited the centaur's competitive thrill, who cracked his knuckles with a terrifying grin and enthusiastically accepted the wager. His enthusiastic acceptance instantly transformed the tense confrontation into a grand, festival-like celebration with fireworks erupting overhead. Astonished by the sudden atmosphere, the young knight wondered aloud why monsters always insisted on making everything so dramatic. She watched as the two competitors walked side by side toward the designated start line, where the simple ground rules were laid out. The first runner to reach the top of the hill and touch the solitary tree would claim victory. They took their marks side by side, the monster leader casting a menacing, razor-sharp smile at his challenger to ask if he was prepared, while the youth fixed his gaze ahead with absolute focus. The instant the signal sounded, the centaur shot forward like a gale, leaving his opponent far behind in a plume of dust as the watching crowd roared that the race was already decided. He suddenly lashed out with his long tail mid-stride, slapping it directly into the youth's face to disrupt his start and prompting Libel to scream in protest at the blatant cheating. He feels a sudden heavy weight pulling at him as his persistent opponent clings tightly to his body, refusing to let go despite being dragged across the dirt. Ignoring the centaur's shouts, the young man stubbornly endures the rough impact, declaring that he has already survived death once in his quest to change the world. The centaur vents his deep-seated bitterness, demanding to know why his kind must suffer and die for humans who only ever care about themselves, even after reincarnation. His companion softly counters his cynicism, quietly insisting that humanity is capable of far more compassion than he believes. Recalling the desolate battlefields of his past where countless monsters and humans perished side by side, the young sage remembers his own agonizing journey through that endless loop of bloodshed, strengthening his resolve to finally put an end to the cycle. With fierce emotion erupting from deep within, he roars his true ambition into the sky, declaring that everyone, human and monster alike, will walk hand in hand toward a happy future. The centaur scoffs at such grand ideals, dismissing them as impossible dreams while accusing his rival of resorting to cheap tricks to win. Unfazed, the young man readily accepts his own limitations, holding a small round object as he admits he cannot achieve victory on his own. Having secretly purchased a firework earlier in town, he suddenly ignites it right beneath them. The violent blast propels him into the air with a deafening boom, catching his rival entirely off guard. Soaring high above the ground, he tumbles head over heels through the air, daringly bypassing the centaur in a desperate gambit to reach the finish line. Crashing hard onto the ground past the finish mark, he lifts his battered, dust-covered face and calls out passionately for friendship, eagerly asking if his wild stunt secured him the win. As the young sage's body immediately begins to regenerate from the impact, the stunned centaur looks down at him in total disbelief, flabbergasted that anyone would willingly launch themselves off an exploding firework. Bursting into hearty laughter, he affectionately rests a hand on the crazy youth's head, admitting that he can't help but respect such unbelievable madness and looks forward to the extraordinary world he was promised. He declared his intention to follow the young mediator, pledging to join his team without hesitation. With a smirk revealing sharp teeth, the centaur cheekily addressed him as the mighty rainbow sage. Standing together beneath the solitary tree in the vast wasteland, Cross simply brushed off the grand title, asking his new companion to call him by his true name as he continued to gather allies on his journey. Inside the Grand Palace Hall, a royal official concludes his term's accounting report to the throne before bowing respectfully and taking his leave. Left alone in the quiet chamber, he slumps in his chair, quietly mocking the grand titles of savior and guardian that the world has placed upon his shoulders. Sinking deeper into the towering throne, the hero gazes up at the vast ceiling, overwhelmed by the pointlessness of his burdens. A dark cynicism grips him, leading him to whisper bitterly whether humanity even deserves saving, or if it should be destroyed alongside everything else. Before his dark thoughts can consume him entirely, a glinting blade cuts through the air as his companion sharp-tonguedly reprimands him for vocalizing such nonsense. Stepping into the hall toward his elevated seat, she approaches as he notes how unusual it is for her to pay him a visit. She forcefully reminds him that Cross endured countless hardships and risked his life to protect this world, making its destruction unthinkable. Humbled by her words, he sighs in defeat, apologizing for his momentary exhaustion. She leaned in closely, provocatively offering to comfort him with her own body while leaning right beside his throne. Unmoved by her playful gesture, he coldly brushed her off, insisting he had no patience for such jokes. She simply turned away with a knowing glance, observing that he would never let anyone other than Cross touch him anyway. Stepping back, she offered a light apology before casually revealing that she had recently visited Cross's parents. The news caused him to snap in agitation, shouting that they had explicitly promised to stay away from the family to avoid bringing them unnecessary trouble. Pushing past his outburst, she urged him to listen to what she had discovered. She explained that his parents shared how Cross genuinely viewed both of them as true friends, filling his letters with stories of Claude, not as a legendary hero, but as a normal friend with whom he shared foolish moments, laughter, and simple joy. Overwhelmed by this sudden realization, he lowered his head into his hand as tears silently overflowed, his voice trembling as he repeatedly murmured that he finally understood. Allowing him a moment to process his emotion, she smoothly shifted the conversation, bringing up one last report. Medill and Sophia had departed for monster territory just a few days prior. Realizing that their former companions had already taken action, His posture straightened as she noted they had been beaten to the punch. He reasoned that with Cross gone, there was no longer any obligation for them to remain united, as their meeting at his grave was purely coincidental. Hearing this, she stretched casually and asked if she should accompany him on his journey. With a sharp, resolute glare, he clasped his armored hands together and decisively declared that it was time to set out and eradicate the monsters. As if echoing across memory, the cheerful spirit of Cross raised his wooden tankard high, calling out a vibrant toast. As he stood offering a platter of freshly cooked fish, the young mediator could only watch as the boisterous centaur draped an arm around the tense knight, loudly insisting that victory deserved a proper feast. Ignoring her stern reminder of their ongoing mission, the centaur urged her to loosen up and embrace the post-battle tradition. Trying to cool their tempers, the young man stepped between them with a heavy plate of food, begging them to eat. But the warrior snapped back with a harsh insult about her companion's equine appearance, sparking an immediate shouting match. Despite their squabbling, both ended up happily devouring the meal, prompting the knight to question why someone of his status was doing the cooking when he was supposed to be the central figure of their group. As the nearby monsters loudly protested the outcome of an earlier contest, claiming unfair advantage had been taken, the mediator pondered how to resolve the lingering tension between all parties. Before he could offer a peaceful solution, the centaur suddenly scooped him up and launched into a frantic, wild rodeo ride across the field. In the background, the wild gallop broke local endurance records to the cheers of the onlookers, while in the foreground, the exhausted knight downed her drink in disgust, despairing over the utter foolishness surrounding her. Having survived the dizzying ride, the young adventurer congratulated himself on keeping his composure, only for a heavy-handed slap of praise on his back to instantly ruin his stomach's stability. As he knelt trembling on the ground from severe motion sickness, the knight could only shake her head at the pathetic sight, calling the entire assembly a collection of fools. Yet, a close look at her flushed face and glassy eyes revealed the true reason for her unusual tolerance. The knight was completely intoxicated. She slammed her tankard down onto the table in a drunken stupor, loudly complaining that there was nowhere near enough liquor to satisfy her. While Cross tried to calm her frantic demands for more alcohol, Gustar looked on, amused by the knight's sudden loss of restraint. As the night wore on outdoors, the female knight staggered wildly, forcing Cross to hold her back before she could cause any more chaos. Meanwhile, the centaur raised his mug high in high spirits, thoroughly enjoying the post-battle revelry. Eventually, she collapsed into a drunken sleep, resting her head against the centaur's flanks while Cross sat exhausted nearby. Taking advantage of the quiet moment, Gustar mentioned that several remnant armies remained in the region, offering to act as a mediator so they could at least attempt negotiations. He warned, however, that peaceful dialogue would not be so easily achieved. Yet Cross refused to lose hope, passionately arguing that open communication could foster mutual understanding and bring them closer to a world without conflict. The centaur then brought up a formidable obstacle, the fire dragon Drake, a creature of immense power who viewed humans as nothing more than prey. He emphasized that this ancient dragon posed a unique danger among the remaining monster forces. Despite the warning, Cross remained optimistic, believing that between Gustar's connections and the knight's prowess, they would prevail. Still groggy, she grumbled about the dragon's notoriety before reminding him that he needed to contribute his own strength to their cause as well. He pushed his vision further, suggesting that if they could unite the monster armies, Claude and Aura might finally come to terms through peaceful discussion. She vehemently rejected the idea, insisting that the hero would never listen, though Cross held firm in his belief that Claude was ultimately a good man. Suddenly, Gustar casually revealed a rumor he had heard about the hero disappearing entirely from the royal kingdom. Before Cross could process the startling news, a desperate cry for help echoed through the air, cutting their conversation short. A severely wounded reptilian messenger burst into the encampment and collapsed before them, pleading frantically for assistance. Recognizing the messenger, Gustar noted that he served under Drake, just as the battered creature gasped out news regarding the hero. Cross froze in sheer horror as the messenger delivered his final, terrifying revelation. The hero was actively launching an attack. While he was far removed from the battlefield, The grim reality was already unfolding. Atop the massive, lifeless body of the fire dragon Drake, the relentless hero stood triumphant amid a raging inferno. Gazing upward with an intense, obsessive focus, he softly declared that this bloody victory was dedicated entirely to Cross. In the quiet warmth of a past memory, the hero sat beside a crackling campfire, weary of repetitive meals. His companion casually reassured him that they would feast luxuriously in the next town, but the white-haired youth sincerely insisted that his friend's cooking was already the greatest luxury he could ask for. Reaching over with a broad grin, he playfully slapped his companion on the back, laughing off the heartfelt compliment with bright camaraderie. Yet that tender memory quickly vanished, leaving him sitting alone amidst a bleak, rocky wasteland beneath a dark and empty sky. Dropping a bland piece of dried ration onto the dirt, he stared forward with hollow eyes, consumed by the realization that nothing in the world had held any taste since they parted. Stepping back into the present reality, he turned his back on his former ally and the non-human allies gathered behind him. Shaken by the chilling emptiness in his gaze, his old friend called out his name in disbelief, shocked by the profound darkness taking root in the hero's heart. Ignoring the concern in his voice, he coldly remarked that none of it mattered anyway, branding them all as nothing more than monsters. Desperate to bridge the terrifying divide opening between them, he reached out his hand and pleaded with the hero to stop and remember who he was. He tried to reason with his former friend, insisting that there was no need for conflict because Aura, unlike the previous Demon King, had no desire for war. Yet the hero's cold, wide eye held only unwavering suspicion. Before another word could be spoken, a swift blade slice cut across his torso, spilling blood into the air before he could even raise a guard. Seeing the brutal blow connect, his companions cried out in horror, their shouts echoing across the field as the sudden violence shattered all hope of peaceful dialogue. Closing the distance instantly, the young knight leaned over his bleeding comrade, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper as he warned the creature never to utter that precious name again. Without allowing a moment of respite, the furious attacker launched forward in a blinding rush, determined to finish the strike. The overwhelming assault pinned the young man against the jagged rocks, leaving him helpless with a gleaming sword pressed against his bare neck. Trapped at knife point, he desperately tried to explain the reality of his situation, pleading that he had simply been reincarnated into this monster's form. Raising his voice in desperation, he insisted that even though his outer form had changed, his soul, mind, and cherished memories were still entirely human. However, the icy warrior coldly rejected his claims, dismissing the revelation as nothing more than a lingering curse cast by the former demon lord. Without a second thought, the knight swung his blade down again, forcing him to scramble wildly backward to narrowly avoid being cut down. Bringing his boots down with heavy force, the hero erupted into a fury, screaming that his true friend would never wear such a pathetic expression. He adamantly insisted that the true cross possessed rounder, far more endearing eyes and straight hair that defined his very essence. In response, Cross yelled back, asking if his current look wasn't an improvement. To prove his true identity, Cross began reciting intimate memories from their journey. How Claude had first invited him to join the party, how Mary taught him to swim at the port town, and how Sophia and Medill had shared their water in the desert. He went on to remind him of everyday moments, bringing up how he always praised Claude's cooking as delicious while others merely gave vague answers, adding that such indifference was always frustrating. Recalling their old pact to drink together until dawn, Cross eagerly suggested they leave everything behind and go for a drink right then and there. Yet the hero remained utterly unmoved, towering over Cross and declaring him to be nothing more than a grotesque monster capable of reading human memories, asking how much further he intended to disgust him. Dismissing the concept of rebirth entirely, he stared down coldly, muttering that if reincarnation were truly real, he would have attempted it long ago. Before he could deliver another strike, a violent surge of dark magic suddenly detonated behind him, forcing him to turn in alarm. Snapping her fingers, Libel manifested crackling spheres of dark energy, venomously declaring the hero to be nothing but an obstacle to Lord Aura's grand vision. Unleashing a barrage of explosive spells, She charged directly at him, screaming that since he had slain the demon lord, no one would object if she took his life now. However, with ruthless precision, Claude casually extended his armored hand and caught her full force assault, grabbing her head in mid-thrust without giving ground. He slammed the knight mercilessly into the earth, the violent impact shattering the stone ground and leaving her coughing blood in the dirt. Before he could finish her, Gustar charged through the dust, grabbing the wounded Libel and Aura to whisk them away in a rapid retreat. With his allies carried out of reach, Cross remained alone, lying helpless before the hero under the cold moonlight. Approaching slowly with his drawn blade, the warrior loomed over the defeated sage, who looked up with bloodied breath and called his name. Halting the lethal point of his sword inches above the youth's throat, he froze, staring into the face of his former friend. Suddenly racked by confusion, he struck his own head in anguish, questioning who Cross truly was and why an inexplicable rage was tearing through his mind. Pressing a hand against his armor, he gasped as a deep, uncomfortable ache surged within his chest, shattering his composure. Lowering his weapon, he sheathed it and announced that he had lost the will to kill, warning Cross never to cross his path again. Turning his back on the fallen youth, he walked into the darkness, steeling his heart with a grim promise to wipe out all monsters without exception. As he walked away into the silent night, Cross lay battered in the dust, watching his former companion slip further into darkness. He sat submerged in the soothing waters of a hot spring, where the steady clack of a bamboo water pipe echoed through the quiet enclosure. Resting beside him in the steaming bath, Drake voiced his sincere gratitude to the young sage for rescuing him from destruction. Despite the dragon's miraculous recovery thanks to his intense vitality, Gustar chastised the young man for moping pitifully, while Cross remained silent, tormented by the painful reality that Claude had not recognized him at all. Although Drake grinningly swore to exact revenge on the hero during their next encounter, the young sage softly corrected him, reminding Gustar that Drake truly desired a world where humans and monsters no longer had to fight. Reflecting on his fallen kin, Drake maintained that retreating into cowardice or abandoning his pride was simply impossible after everything they had lost. Gustar pointed out the stark difficulty of their path, noting that changing the minds of stubborn humans was proving to be just as daunting as convincing hostile monsters. Fixing his gaze on his despondent companion, Gustar asked directly if the emotional weight had become too unbearable, offering him a chance to give up on his quest once and for all. Rejecting the doubt entirely, the young sage burst out of the water with a resolute shout, declaring that their brief encounter was not the end and that he would personally convince Claude as his true best friend. Welcoming them back outside the castle grounds, Libel offered a warm, relieved smile, expressing her deep gratitude that they had both returned safely from their dangerous endeavor. As she looked on, Mavis stood within the grand hall and informed the group that she had already been fully briefed on the recent developments. Looking down upon the assembled group, she expressed her sheer surprise that Cross had managed to return with the remnant forces aligned as his allies. Hearing her words, the rugged warrior smirked and insisted he was following Cross rather than the demon lord, a fierce loyalty that left Libel feeling envious while Aura sulked quietly over another defeat. His mind racing as he recalled Claude's vow to exterminate all monsters, he asked with growing apprehension whether a full-scale war with humanity was truly about to break out again. In response to his anxious questioning, Libel stepped toward a large display board to explain the current standing between monsters and humans, reassuring him that their economy was currently quite stable. Pointing to a detailed map of the continent, she detailed how their realm maintained good relations with maritime merchant nations, even as the regions surrounding the hero's kingdom and the former demon lord's castle remained fiercely anti-monster. Upon hearing this, Cross voiced his alarm at the idea of those nations attacking, but she calmly clarified that such skirmishes carried no real intensity. She revealed grave news. Shortly after Cross's encounter with the hero Claude, sightings of his former party members were reported across the nation. Hearing her analysis, he listened intently as Libel explained that in normal warfare a party moves together, meaning their scattered actions were deeply personal. They were seeking vengeance, believing he was dead. Overcome with guilt, he forcefully slapped his own cheeks to regain composure, agonizing over whether his desire to protect them had inadvertently brought them harm, and swore to let them know he was still alive. Refusing to yield, he declared his intention to turn everyone into allies, though Liebel urged caution, reminding him that 8 years of peace had bred complacency and that unifying the monster factions would not be easy. As he slumped under the gloom of his thoughts, the surrounding soldiers began to banter, expressing relief and gratitude that he had arrived in time to save them from total defeat. While he sulked, she noted their complete lack of cohesion with an exasperated sigh, watching as one of their centaur allies volunteered to scout ahead in the capital, leading them further into the castle depths. She brought the group before the massive doors of the treasury, announcing that their liege was waiting inside. Following her inside, he immediately recognized Aura's maid, who commended him on his impressive match and his ability to subdue the headstrong Drake. As he listened, Mavis smiled with sharp satisfaction, finding it magnificent whenever the weak confronted and crushed the strong. She then turned her gaze to Liebel, scolding her sharply for underestimating her opponents and suffering a pathetic defeat, leaving the young demon ruler speechless. She continued her relentless scolding, demanding full retribution from Liebel for her past failure. Cross could only sigh in exasperation as he realized the imposing woman was indeed Liebel's former commander. Seeing Liebel practically melting into a puddle under the intense pressure, Aura intervened, urging the commander to spare the girl. Seizing the moment, Liebel weakly gestured toward the grand doors, suggesting they proceed into the treasury. Beyond the threshold, a magnificent gallery unfolded, its walls lined with grand framed portraits stretching deep into the hall. Stepping into the vast vault, the young swordsman stood in awe as he gazed around the high-ceilinged room filled with pristine glass displays showcasing legendary weapons. Beside him, Liebel proudly beamed, boasting about the incredible quantity and quality of their greatest sanctuary of wealth, while behind them, Aura shivered with uncharacteristic anticipation. Unable to contain her obsession any longer, the maid burst into a radiant smile, clutching a precious jewel box tight against her chest. She threw her arms wide in dramatic ecstasy, declaring that every single artifact in the vault radiated an unmatched brilliance and absolute worth. Watching her euphoric dance in the background, Cross sweat dropped and noted that while she undoubtedly knew the treasury inside out, her intense obsession made her a rather eccentric guide. Turning back to the business at hand, Liebel inquired about his weapon preferences. He confidently grinned, explaining that thanks to Mary's rigorous training in various combat styles, he was skilled with virtually any arms. Browsing through the displays, he decided he preferred a simple, functional weapon rather than anything overly ornate, perhaps a sword akin to Claude's blade, paired with a dagger for flexibility. He reached toward a barrel filled with standard blades, calling out to Aura about a weapon he recognized, but she quickly dismissed it as mass-produced junk. He stubbornly protested, insisting it was Claude's own sword. In response, she explained that this was precisely what unsettled her, pointing out how terrifying it was that a hero capable of felling a demon lord relied on such an ordinary weapon. Deflated by her blunt reasoning, he offered a muted response, finally understanding her point. Shifting his attention away, his eyes landed on a solitary short sword displayed prominently atop a pedestal. As he examined the blade, Metal praised his sharp eye for choosing such an intriguing artifact, while Liebel identified the weapon as ataraxia, though she cautioned that it was far from a great sword. The weapon possessed a rare trait. It was a living blade that adapted and grew alongside its master, altering its very shape to suit the wielder's strength. Yet Liebel added that despite its rarity, this particular sword was considered defective because a proper weapon was meant to enhance its user's power rather than depend on it. Ignoring her warnings completely, he grabbed the hilt without hesitation and declared his choice, prompting her to ask if he had even heard a word she said. With a vibrant grin, he raised the blade high, declaring that they would grow stronger together, while Metal observed that such a choice was entirely true to his nature and wished them well. In that moment, he remembered how Claude had cherished the blade since childhood, passing it down to him with the earnest wish that it would become his true partner. He found himself suddenly overwhelmed as the women crowded around him, each clamoring to offer their assistance or their own prized possessions. complaining that Claude seemed to receive every advantage while thrusting daggers and robes in his direction. Clutching his newly acquired living weapon close to his chest, he offered them a warm, earnest smile, expressing his heartfelt gratitude for all their generosity. Yet beneath his gracious smile lay a sober realization, as he silently admitted to himself that he had relied on the strength of others for far too long. Raising the blade before him with unshakable resolve, he swore to push himself beyond his limits, determined to grow stronger so he could protect everyone and foster true understanding. Before his momentum could carry him forward, Liebel interrupted his lofty goal with a surprisingly mundane request, insisting that he attend their local educational facility for a few days before setting out after Claude. She offered a soft apology for the sudden imposition, to which he simply chuckled, reassuring her that he was more than happy to fulfill his duty as a fellow citizen of this realm. Expecting a prestigious academy, he found himself genuinely excited by the prospect, musing that he had never possessed the chance to experience proper schooling back when he was fully human. However, his lofty expectations shattered instantly upon arrival when he stepped into the courtyard, only to realize that the grand institution was actually a chaotic kindergarten filled with rambunctious toddlers. Frozen in place with a wide, incredulous grin, he could only let out a speechless gasp as the utter absurdity of his situation hit him. Inside the brightly lit classroom, the instructor stood before the chalkboard and politely inquired if everyone was prepared to begin their studies. Sitting awkwardly at a minuscule wooden desk, the young adventurer found himself surrounded by tiny children and whimsical little creatures. He could hardly process the bizarre reality of his predicament, marveling at how he had somehow been reduced to a kindergarten student. His shock only deepened when he turned around and spotted his companions standing in the back, shouting out in disbelief as the laughing centaur and a disguised Liebel admitted they simply could not miss such a ridiculous spectacle. Determined not to let the embarrassment crush his spirit, he quickly shifted his mindset, deciding to use the opportunity to learn more about demon culture while setting a proper example for the children. With order restored, the instructor officially commenced the lesson, announcing that today's topic would cover the various distinct races of the world. At the conclusion of the morning session, the teacher asked if everyone had understood the lesson, prompting a loud, unanimous cheer of agreement from the enthusiastic class. While a tiny penguin classmate casually remarked on how simple the material was, he clutched his head in absolute despair, completely baffled and unable to comprehend a single word. He rested his head against the bench, utterly exhausted by the lesson, when a gentle tug on his sleeve pulled him back as the children rushed outside for recess. Swooning with admiration, a young demon girl excitedly declared that she would become his bride when she grew up, prompting a polite, bashful response from him. Observing the sweet interaction, Liebel noted how natural he was with children as he gently explained to the girl that if her feelings remained unchanged in the future, she could ask him again then. Recalling how their party used to visit orphanages together, Liebel smiled fondly while the girl squealed with joy and happily ran off. Meanwhile, out in the sunlit yard, the children scattered across the grounds, filling the air with cheerful chatter as they played freely under the open sky. Watching from a bench, Mavis agreed that seeing him interact so gently with the little ones was deeply comforting, until a sudden commotion startled him. A distressed cry echoed through the courtyard as a guard checked on a weeping child, sending a surge of protective instinct pulsing through his heart. Reaffirming his steadfast resolve to safeguard these young lives, he decided to join in their play and keep them out of harm's way. Approaching a small group gathered on the field, he called out enthusiastically, asking what game they were playing and if he could join them. The child turned with a beaming smile and casually announced they were playing Sage, leaving him utterly bewildered once again. He pointed out that, as a human, he was technically their natural enemy, but the children completely ignored his logic as they squabbled over who would get to play the heroic Sage. Overriding his objection, the energetic group assigned him the hero's mantle and eagerly pointed across the yard toward Aura, branding her as the evil knight to be defeated. Swarming forward with relentless excitement, the kids ambushed the reluctant maid, leaving her groaning in exasperation as she struggled to keep up with their chaotic battle. Praising their valiant charge, he congratulated the young adventurers for advancing so far, while the mock villain bellowed back with exaggerated fury to keep the fantasy alive. Stepping into the role of the grand adversary, he draped a cloth around his shoulders like a cape and proclaimed his strength, sending the children into delightedly theatrical panic. Fueled by the excitement, one of the young beastkin stomped forward passionately, declaring that a true ruler of demons must possess absolute strength to guide them. That bold claim sparked a heated debate among the youths regarding the current political regime, with some arguing that Aura was far too gentle to rule, while others scolded their peers for repeating dangerous gossip overheard from their parents. Shocked by the gravity of their words, he froze as he overheard the children casually discuss impending human invasions and urge a preemptive strike, realizing how deeply their parents' warmongering rhetoric had taken root in their young minds. Interrupting the heavy atmosphere, Mavis clapped her hands with a bright, welcoming smile, calling out that it was time for everyone to wash up for lunch. The serious chatter vanished instantly, replaced by the quiet comfort of warm bowls of soup and fresh bread awaiting them in the dining area. Contemplating the deep-seated militarism embedded in demon culture, Cross silently acknowledged that the shadow of the former demon lord still heavily influenced the populace, convincing many monsters that strength and conquest were the only path forward. As he continued to eat, his mind raced with concern over how to re-educate the young children. Just as Aura stepped into the classroom to announce that a special teacher would be conducting their afternoon lesson. Before he could ponder the dilemma further, Liebel stepped up to the front of the classroom and commanded everyone's attention, boldly declaring her dream of creating a peaceful world where humans and monsters would no longer be forced to fight. She turned to the young students with a warm smile, asking what their own dreams were, prompting excited shouts from the children about becoming knights, bakers, and even marrying Cross. While praising their wonderful ambitions, her expression turned serious as she reminded them that if war broke out, those dreams would vanish and many of them would be forced onto the battlefield instead. She declared her resolve to protect their futures so that they, their children, and future generations could freely pursue their passions, leaving Cross watching in awe as she held the entire room spellbound. Spreading her arms wide, she urged the young demons to look beyond their narrow borders and discover the vastness of the wider world. She emphasized that confining themselves strictly to demon territory would only limit their potential, whereas expanding their horizons would naturally expand their dreams. In response to her ambitious vision, a young beastman child stood up and protested that such a goal was impossible since even the previous demon lord had failed, though she calmly acknowledged the immense difficulty of the task. She reassured the skeptical classroom that with strong allies like the hero by her side, she would build the perfect environment for them to learn, asking them if they could truly believe in a brighter future. She acknowledged her own lack of power compared to past rulers, yet the children's enthusiastic shouts filled the room, eager to embrace her vision and offer their help. With a subtle smile, she added that despite her shortcomings, her ambition was greedier than any of theirs. Watching her speak with such quiet resolve, he felt deeply moved by her words. A little later, she stood alone near the hallway doors, staring silently at the floor. In the quiet corridor, she quietly berated herself as a fraud who only offered pretty words, but he startled her by stepping up and passionately defending her speech. As she lamented having shown him such a pathetic side of herself, he countered with bright energy, insisting that her open vulnerability was a true sign of strength. She explained that a ruler could not show weakness or burden others, leading him to offer a simple alternative. If they were friends, she could at least share those inner thoughts with him. She reminded him with a wry look that she was actually older than him and could not behave like a young student, leaving him flustered as he wondered if he had been intrusive. Turning back toward him, she softly spoke his name, her calm demeanor filled with quiet warmth. Meanwhile, in a quiet building nearby, a subtle sense of anticipation lingered, echoing a gentle desire to meet again soon. Far away from the castle, Metal clutches a soft plush toy made in Cross's likeness tightly against her chest. With an obsessive gaze, she whispers a solemn vow to the doll, promising that she will find a way to restore him to life and begging him to await her return. Behind her, the surrounding countryside lies completely pulverized, dotted with massive, deep craters that attest to the catastrophic power of her spellcraft as she sets out on her relentless path. With an enthusiastic posture, Liebel took the floor to open the strategy meeting, announcing their future policy under the team name Beautifuls. As she began her address, the assembled allies stood attentively, ready to hear the details of her plan. Outraged by the absurd title, Cross shouted in complete disbelief, while Mavis calmly pondered if the name suggested a group of beautiful fools. Steering the discussion back to business, she detailed their strategic objectives, emphasizing the need to inspect damaged territories and bring neutral factions to their side amidst rising hero momentum. She then raised the crucial matter of their primary obstacle, confronting the hero party directly. Turning to the young warrior, she asked if he could handle persuading his former comrades before their actions led to catastrophic damage. Undeterred by the skepticism around him, he stepped forward and firmly accepted the task, declaring that persuading them was a responsibility only he could fulfill. Considering his response, she mused quietly on the terrifying nature of the hero party, leaving the group to reflect on the difficult journey ahead. Following her strategic briefing, Aura questioned whether anyone with a better attitude was available, while Cross pondered their options. He suddenly proposed Metal, recalling a past ordeal where he had been completely separated from the party inside a strange dungeon. During that incident, the ancient structure had suddenly transformed and collapsed beneath him, sending him falling into the unknown depths. Upon landing, he was confronted by Metal, who dramatically proclaimed that their souls were bound together across lifetimes. While she gushed with joy over their reunion and envisioned time alone together, he could only sweat nervously at her intense devotion. Their moment was swiftly interrupted as Aura dropped in, declaring she would not leave them unmonitored and urging an immediate escape. Returning to the present conversation, he marveled at such incredible magic while expressing sympathy for whoever had crafted that dungeon. With their next destination determined, the young demon ruler cheerfully declared that they would head toward the attacked village without delay. Leaving the castle behind, the party set off along a winding dirt road surrounded by dense woodland. Beside him, she marched forward with boundless excitement, unwilling to wait idly in the castle after making such bold promises to the children. She blithely brushed off her Demon King duties, claiming her future self would handle them, a blatant display of procrastination that left her companions exasperated. Exasperated by her casual attitude, the young warrior turned to his companion, questioning if she had truly made any progress, while their stern commander stressed the absolute necessity of completing the mission without failure. Sensing the rising tension, the young demon princess offered a bright, encouraging smile and sweetly declared her trust, instantly shattering the knight's stern composure. Overwhelmed by the sudden praise, the armored warrior fired up with fiery determination and vowed to protect her, leaving the young man to marvel at how effortlessly she had been manipulated. As they set off, he tried to convince their centaur companion to carry the newly motivated warrior, but the beast firmly refused, completely unbothered even as she shouted battle cries into the open air. Instead, the creature slung an arm around the young man and playfully offered to carry him instead, provoking an immediate look of utter disgust and rejection. Leaving the banter behind, the party pressed deeper into the dense forest, making steady progress toward their destination. Checking her map, the demon princess announced that they were approaching their target, but before they could celebrate, a sudden noise halted them in their tracks. Emerging into a clearing, they found their path blocked by a band of rough, heavily armed monster mercenaries. Aggressive and hostile, the beastly leader bared its teeth and issued a ruthless ultimatum, demanding they step aside or face immediate death. Unsheathing his weapon with eager enthusiasm, Cross turned to Liebel, treating this upcoming skirmish against the bandits as her first true battle while checking if Aura was prepared. Liebel calmly assured him she was ready. Before he could take a single step, however, Aura and their centaur companion struck with terrifying speed, cleanly neutralizing the entire hostile mob in a matter of seconds. Left standing completely motionless with his sword still drawn, he stared in utter disbelief at the fallen foes, realizing the entire fight had concluded before he could even raise his blade. Relieved by the swift victory, Liebel called out to the maid, who warmly welcomed them and expressed her gratitude that everyone was unharmed, just as an incoming shot sliced through the air. Spurred into action, he immediately threw himself in front of Liebel to shield her, anxiously demanding if she was hurt, though she brushed off his dramatic concern with composure. Tied up and thoroughly defeated, the captive beast-man snarled in defiance, cursing the Demon King and demanding to be executed immediately if that was their intention. Watching the restrained captives, Liebel stroked her chin in deep thought, remarking to her companion that these men were no ordinary bandits, and expressing unease over the frantic hurry they had been in. Casting a stern look upon the tied-up beast-men, Metal revealed the truth of their situation, explaining to the group that these aggressive attackers were actually remnant soldiers. Sweating with anxiety, the captured soldiers silently lamented their choices, regretting ever having engaged in combat when their sole goal had been to flee from a terrifying pursuer. When asked what could possibly drive them to flee in such panic, a vivid memory flashed of their commander screaming for everyone to run from their true nightmare, the witch. As he listened to the panicked soldier's warning, far across the region, the enigmatic sorceress stood surrounded by a vast horde of vengeful demonic forces. The monstrous remnants rallied in terror, shouting for everyone to attack together to avenge their fallen demon king, yet she merely sighed in frustration, wishing only to return home to her quiet research. As their battle cries echoed with desperate demands for vengeance, she repeated the word with cold disinterest, thoroughly unimpressed by their grand declarations. Deciding that the commotion had gone on long enough, she conjured a swirling vortex of spatial energy, preparing to wipe out the entire horde in a single devastating strike. Before her deadly spell could consume the battlefield, a lone set of footsteps hit the ground, rushing headlong toward the chaos. It was Cross, calling out her name with desperate urgency, causing the formidable witch to pause in genuine astonishment. Though her powerful magic surged forward into a blinding tear in reality, he sprinted straight into the blinding flash without hesitation. As the destructive force erupted across the landscape, Liebel and her companions watched in utter shock, screaming his name as the explosion enveloped the area. Yet through the clearing dust, he stood unscathed, catching his breath as he softly confessed how long he had longed to see her again. Lowering her staff, she looked upon him with a warm, tender smile, expressing her profound relief that he was alive and well. She proclaimed her profound love with resolute certainty, stating that her very soul knew him unconditionally. Staring back in wide-eyed astonishment, the young man was left utterly speechless as her sudden declaration echoed in the air. Standing face to face amidst the open field, Metal greeted Cross, confirming beyond doubt that he was truly alive. Baffled by her immediate certainty, he demanded to know how she was so sure of his identity. Playfully tugging at his hair, she asserted that his appearance was unmistakable, expressing surprise that he was shocked given Claude's failure to recognize her earlier. When he attempted to defend Claude, suggesting her judgment might be overly severe, she abruptly shut down his protest, declaring that true devotion would have seen through any disguise. Stunned by her uncompromising logic, his eyes widened in total silence. She, meanwhile, let out a soft, playful heart flutter, reveling in the charming reaction she had elicited from him. Leaning in closely to inspect him, she acknowledged that his transformation into a demon was remarkable, curiosity overcoming her as she pressed him to explain how his soul had returned, whether through reincarnation or direct transfer. Their conversation was suddenly broken when shouts echoed across the terrain, causing him to turn and see the rest of his group arriving. As she rushed to his side expressing intense relief while scolding him for running ahead, he offered a sheepish apology before smoothly introducing Aura to the witch. As he looked on, Metal raised her glowing catalyst above her head, sending a shockwave of tension through the group as Aura and the others called out in alarm. Following her sudden surge of power, a violent blast erupted before them, prompting urgent cries of concern as Aura braced against the impact. Standing her ground across the clearing, the witch glared suspiciously at the group, silently questioning why a female demon was standing beside Cross. Overwhelmed by possessive fury, she lunged forward with explosive speed, screaming at the top of her lungs that Cross belonged to her after a decade of waiting. With fierce determination burning in her eyes, she reinforced her conviction, shouting that 10 full years had fueled her desperation. Thrusting her magical staff straight at her opponent, she struck with lethal force, but Aura responded instantaneously to parry the deadly blow. Surprised by the maid's physical prowess, the witch tightened her grip, secretly resolving that no one would ever steal what was hers again. Suddenly, a disruption cascaded through her magical aura, making her realize that this skilled adversary was capable of neutralizing her spells directly. Seeing the battle reach a dangerous stalemate, Liebel raised her voice to intervene, pleading that it was all a misunderstanding and that they were Cross's allies. The phrase echoed in her mind, calling back bitter memories of Cross's past, how he had been endlessly scorned, insulted, and mistreated by the ignorant masses. Her narrow eyes flashed with suspicion as she accused them of taking advantage of Cross. Liebel immediately countered, asserting that they would never exploit him and explaining how Cross endured hardship with a smile for their sakes, firmly declaring that he was now by her side. As the tension flared between the women, Cross shouted out, desperate for them to listen to what he was trying to say, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Suddenly, the witch fell quiet and matter-of-factly pointed out a glaring truth. Cross was no longer standing among them. Miles away, he was slung over the saddle of a galloping horse, bound and helpless. Captured by a feline soldier, he cursed his own carelessness, embarrassed that focusing on the witch had allowed him to be taken without a fight. The lone rider pushed the horse across the arid, rocky landscape toward a secluded mountain fortress nestled high in the hills. Surrounded by jagged peaks, the ancient stone castle stood silent, a secluded bastion away from any potential rescuers. Inside the fortress, he was shoved forward by his captors, his mind racing as he worried about the battle left behind and how urgently he needed to return. Upon entering the inner chamber, the guard announced to their leader that the prisoner had arrived, prompting him to gauge his chances of overpowering this remnant soldier to make a swift escape. However, those thoughts vanished instantly when he looked up to see a colossal, heavily armored orc chief towering over him from a throne. The monstrous commander leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked onto the young captive as he recognized him as the legendary Rainbow Sage. The towering chieftain loomed imposing over his bound captive, leaving Cross to absorb the grim reality that defeating such a monster in physical combat was an utter impossibility. Demanding answers, he pressed the giant on why he had been captured, to which the chieftain bluntly explained that he was a hostage meant to trade for the head of Demon King Orafiel. With a sinister glint in his eye, the warlord repeated his demand for Aura's life without a shadow of hesitation. Baffled by such an absurd ransom, he questioned how the beastmen could have predicted their arrival and insisted the trade would never work, though the chieftain mockingly countered that rumors spoke of Cross being highly favored by the Demon King. Laying out his tactical reasoning, the massive brute explained that this territory was the closest human-attacked region to the capital, making it highly probable a sage would be dispatched there. He dismissed his fallen comrades with cold contempt, revealing that the other beastmen had merely served as unwitting bait while foolishly seeking revenge for the previous Demon King. Amused by the endless interrogation, the giant reminded his captive of his precarious state, but Cross ignored the warning to ask one final question about why the chieftain held such hostility toward Aura. Resting his chin on his hand, he casually admitted that peace meant he could no longer indulge in his favorite pastime of slaughtering humans. Appalled by such wanton cruelty, he shouted that the warlord was acting out of pure selfishness, yet the chieftain brazenly argued that Aura was no different, manipulating the war to her advantage because she lacked individual strength. Refusing to allow his companion to be demeaned, he glared with fierce conviction and declared that the chieftain was nothing more than a common bandit. He listened in silence as the guard barked orders to keep him securely locked away behind bars. Moments later, he was tossed unceremoniously onto the cold stone floor of a cell, his body tightly bound with heavy ropes. Sweating anxiously, he inwardly chastised himself for provoking the chieftain, but he maintained his silence when the guard commanded him to shut up. As soon as the guard departed into the corridor, he sat up calmly and resolved that it was time to make his escape. Recalling the escape techniques Mary had taught him, he skillfully slipped his wrists free, allowing the bindings to slide off onto the floor. Peering cautiously between the cell bars, he was surprised to see that the hallway outside was completely unattended. Remembering the path through the hideout, He struck the stone wall with full force, breaking open a way out so he could quickly rejoin his friends. Without warning, a massive opponent smashed through the stone, mocking him for breaking free and declaring that escaping his cell meant choosing death. Meanwhile, outside the stronghold, Metal, Liebel, Mavis, and Aura arrived at the entrance, with the witch grimly declaring her intention to eliminate every enemy inside. Screams of panic erupt as the Dark Witch tears through the fortress defenses, blasting guards aside in an explosion of magic and stone. Behind her, Liebel watches in awe as the defenders scramble in vain to restrain the terrifying intruder. Impressed by the display, a nearby warrior remarks on how reassuring it is to have such an overwhelming force on their side. Liebel readily agrees, amazed that a single spellcaster can dismantle the enemy's stronghold so effortlessly. Hearing their chatter, she turns with a cold glare, utterly rejecting any notion of comradeship. The formidable, which makes it clear that their lives are spared only because they know where Cross is located, warning that once he is freed, her wrath will turn upon them next. Dashing forward into the corridors, she commands them to save their breath and concentrate entirely on the rescue mission. Watching her storm off ahead, Aura turns to Liebel and suggests it would be far more efficient to search a different sector rather than follow the volatile witch. Liebel nods in agreement, leaving their companion utterly baffled by the sudden split. As they adjust their route, he comments on how deeply motivated Aura seems to be for this mission. She calmly replies that she is simply carrying out the orders of Lady Mavis, though a quiet turn of her head hints at a far more personal reason. Deep down, she is driven by a memory of Cross putting everything on the line to save Liebel. Clenching her fists, she silently vows that she will never leave such a massive debt unpaid. While she moved through another part of the fortress, Liebel discussed the nature of the enemy forces, explaining that the remnant soldiers held here were notorious renegades who repeatedly committed heinous crimes. Her massive monster companion agreed, remarking that such dangerous company seemed fitting for her situation. Continuing her reasoning, Liebel noted that since their target was captured as a high-value hostage, the captors likely would not execute him immediately, though she still could not suppress her deep anxiety. Her fierce, shark-toothed ally merely growled in response, his patience wearing thin. Unable to bear her fretful pacing, the wild warrior hoisted Liebel onto his shoulder and sprinted ahead at full speed, shouting that this burst of haste was a one-time favor. As they hurtled down the stone corridor, their female companion struggled to keep pace, shouting for him to slow down and proceed with caution. The running beastman barked back fiercely, declaring that speed was something he would never compromise on. Meanwhile, in a different hallway, a formidable blockade of monstrous guards and heavily armed beastmen suddenly materialized, completely blocking the path forward. Confronted by the sudden threat, the armored knight bravely stepped in front of Aura, instructing her to stay back while assuring her that she would handle the entire mob of adversaries alone. With a powerful sweep of her blade, the knight released a surging shockwave of magical force that swept through the hallway and obliterated the enemy front line in an instant. Surveying the fallen renegades, the knight mocked their lack of strength, questioning if any true threat existed among them, while proudly reaffirming her absolute vow to protect her lady. Without warning, a massive, cataclysmic force smashed through the ceiling, shattering stone slabs and sending heavy debris crashing onto the floor right beside her, stunning the triumphant warrior into immediate silence. The sudden eruption left her gasping in complete disbelief amid the rising dust. As dust and debris shattered from the collapsing ceiling above, the centaur warrior and Liebel shielded themselves from the sudden impact. Gazing up through the gaping breach in the stone ceiling, they heard a voice calling out Liebel's name from above. Hearing a strange, wet, bubbling sound reverberating nearby, the young demon girl pressed forward with fierce determination, intent on saving her companion. A mysterious figure draped in white and wearing a long-beaked mask manifested before them, musing that since the Demon King was already present, kidnapping the sage was meaningless, so it decided to join the fight itself. Mounting the centaur warrior's back, she held on tight as he charged across the stone chamber toward the strange intruder. He delivered a powerful strike against the intruder, but his elbow passed right through the gelatinous body, leaving his forearm severely scorched by an acidic burn. Whispering mockingly right beside his ear, the creature chillingly warned that touching its body would result in complete dissolution. Realizing physical strikes were futile against a slime entity, the warrior attempted another desperate maneuver, only for the creature to mock his foolish persistence. Shock waves of agony flared across his flank as fresh burns erupted on his skin, despite keeping his distance from the entity's physical frame. Gazing around the chamber in horror, they realized the entire room was now filled with floating acidic spheres, as the masked slime declared the domain to be completely under its control. The gelatinous assassin murmured nonchalantly about melting its victims slowly, casually wondering if taking the Demon King's life would earn a reprimand from its superiors. Before the creature could act, a quiet figure stepped directly between the injured centaur and the sea of lethal acidic spheres, taking the beast-man completely by surprise. The warrior shouted out in desperation, pleading with her to flee from the trap, but she merely raised her arm in silent composure. Instantly, a blinding radiance erupted throughout the chamber, manifesting enormous, razor-sharp star crystals that shattered the darkness. Amidst the swirling gale of mana, her gaze remained unwavering, radiating absolute authority and unyielding power. Apologizing with cool detachment for being in a hurry, she unleashed the stellar magic, instantly encasing the monster in solid crystal as it shrieked in horror. The centaur shielded himself in astonishment as the acidic trap dissolved into dust before his eyes. With a brittle snap, the bird-like mask shivered into 1,000 sharp fragments, signaling the complete demise of the entity. Silence returned to the grand hall, now bathed in a gentle shower of shimmering stardust and giant crystalline structures. As the dust settled, Liebel questioned her about her claim of weakness back at the kindergarten, to which she admitted that facing metal alone would indeed be difficult, before commending the centaur warrior on how much stronger he had grown. Having demonstrated her resolve, she declared her unwavering commitment to standing at the very forefront of her people whenever crisis threatened their safety. Her armored guard rushed over in a flurry of panic, her suit tattered and scraped from battle, anxiously asking if her lady was uninjured and what had become of the enemy. Yet Aura merely returned the concern, gently asking about her defender's own battered condition instead. Gesticulating towards a massive gargoyle beast lying shattered in a pool of dark blood within the corridor, the knight proudly boasted that she had vanquished the creature single-handedly without breaking a sweat. Noticing her guard's visible exhaustion and bruises, she softly teased her companion about looking far worse for wear than someone who claimed an easy victory, bringing a moment of light-hearted laughter before they resolved to move forward together. Silence descended once more upon the stone corridors of the stronghold, sunlight filtering quietly through the tall windows. Suddenly, a small cat-like creature squealed in sheer terror as a dark and imposing figure swept through the doorway. Shadowed beneath her iconic conical hat, Metal smirked with calm authority, declaring that she would locate Cross without delay. Sweeping her dark cape around her, she strode down the hall, brimming with absolute certainty that no matter where he wandered, she was always the one destined to find him. Behind her stood the remains of a colossal crocodile monster, utterly impaled and shredded by giant crystalline pillars, showing the catastrophic magic she had unleashed without even breaking her stride as she told him to wait safely. With precise and graceful steps, she glided across the stone floor toward her destination. While she pressed onward, far away the massive orc warlord hoisted Cross high into the air by his skull, musing aloud at how intriguing it was to find a toy capable of regenerating from damage so rapidly. Though blood trickled down his battered face and his body neared its limit, he clung stubbornly to consciousness as the giant brute demanded to be entertained even further. Standing amidst stone ruins before a fallen beast, the witch Metal gazed into the distance, resolved in her heart that she would soon need to go retrieve Cross. Her thoughts drifted through the arched stone corridors of her memory, acknowledging the profound truth that she simply could not manage without him. Under the shadow of her wide-brimmed witch hat, she reflected silently on how much had changed ever since that pivotal moment. In her memory, she recalled the young man pushing himself relentlessly while walking through the forest, Despite his companions urging him to rest due to his unfamiliarity with long journeys, he insisted on helping, believing that such moments were when he could prove useful. Returning to the present, she began walking through the woodland with a bag slung over her shoulder, prompting her young demon companion to call out and ask where she was heading. As her inquisitive companion teased that she had been preparing remedies right in front of them all along specifically because Cross was present, she curtly muttered that she was merely making medicine before telling her to be quiet. Yet her companion pressed on, pointing out how unique Cross truly was compared to others who constantly demanded things of them, noting that he was the only one who sincerely considered their well-being. Adjusting her witch hat as she continued forward, she coldly replied that if her companion understood that much, she should simply leave her alone. She meticulously prepares various unsettling ingredients, pinned bats, writhing snakes, and jars of strange specimens, plunging them one by one into her brewing pot. As she brews, her mind wanders back to Cross, her heart pounding frantically at the mere thought of how impressive he always seems. Stirring the dark potion, she finds a calming sense of tranquility in her craft, determined to keep this unsettling alchemy hidden from his sight. Yet, as the liquid simmers, painful memories resurface of villagers standing over her with sheer disgust, demanding she put an end to her disturbing work. They had hurled bitter insults at her back then, branding her a foul monster whose very gaze carried curses, driving her away from their home. The lingering hurt leaves her with a single, haunting fear. She cannot bear the thought of Cross ever looking upon her with that same repulses. Her melancholic thoughts are abruptly shattered when Cross himself appears behind her, casually calling out to ask what she is doing. Startled out of her skin, she leaps backward in a frantic attempt to cover the pot, stammering in alarm, though he simply looks on and asks if it is alchemy. Far from being disgusted, his eyes light up with genuine wonder as he marvels at seeing alchemy for the first time and excitedly offers to help. He mentions his background in hunting and readiness to prepare ingredients, asking what potion she is crafting. When she admits she is making an elixir to render his skin as hard as steel, he chuckles that such invincibility might be a bit much. He held up a small frog with wide-eyed curiosity, asking if its liver was the key ingredient for brewing an antidote, while the witch quietly confirmed the recipe beside her simmering cauldron. Holding the newly finished vial up to the light, he marveled at how simple materials could be transformed so effortlessly into a completed potion. Spurred on by his genuine curiosity, Metal passionately detailed the delicate nuances of her craft, explaining how tiny adjustments in proportions could turn deadly toxins into life-saving remedies. Her sudden realization that she had been rambling made her freeze in panic, terrified that she had repulsed him, yet his gentle smile proved that he was simply delighted to see her so happy. Leaning in closer with an eager, earnest expression, the young man warmly asked her to teach him everything about the craft she cherished so deeply. Under the wide shadow of her brimmed hat, her eyes widened in quiet disbelief at receiving such unconditional warmth for the very art others had shunned. A radiant smile broke across her face as tears gathered in her eyes, softly affirming the passion she had held buried for so long. The cherished memory shattered against a cold reality, where a lonely tombstone stood in the open field, driving her to slam her fists against her workbench in anguished fury over her inability to revive him. Surrounded by mountain-high piles of dusty grimoires, she wept over 8 exhausting years of endless research, questioning the point of loving magic if it failed her when it mattered most. Standing isolated in her massive, shadow-draped study beside her small companion, the heartbroken witch bowed her head, crushed by the unbearable weight of her grief. Drowned in profound grief, she stared into empty space, wondering if ending her own life was the only escape from the void left by Cross. Yet, as her mind drifted back to the horrific day it all began, she recalled standing among the crumbling stone corridors of the temple. Through the settling dust, her gaze locked onto the bloody, kneeling figure of the young man she held dear. As he called out her name in surprise, her heart slammed against her ribs at the sight of his severe injuries, knowing she had to treat them immediately. But before she could move, the colossal orc warlord loomed over them, prompting the wounded youth to scream at her to run and name the brute as his attacker, igniting a murderous spark in her eyes. Overwhelmed by sudden fury, she launched herself upward, demanding to know who had dared her cross before releasing a blinding wave of magical energy. Dozens of compressed orb-like spells materialized in the air around her, raining down in a catastrophic bombardment that eradicated the target area so completely that not even ashes remained. Without slowing down, she darted forward like a shadowy projectile across the shattered ground. With staff in hand and her face twisted in absolute wrath, she closed the distance to her true target. Unshaken by her terrifying speed, the giant orc warlord sneered at her approach, mocking the witch's fury and eager to make her his next plaything. The brute grunted in mild annoyance as the magical barrage struck him, barely slowing his relentless advance. Shattering the surrounding ice with raw physical strength, he lunged forward and swung his massive fist directly at the lone witch. Towering over her amidst the spray of jagged ice, he taunted her fiercely, questioning if this pathetic effort was truly the best the hero's party had to offer. Observing the desperate clash from behind, the young warrior realized that she was fundamentally a rearguard spellcaster. Without frontline defenders to draw the enemy's fury, she was unable to unleash her true potential, prompting him to resolve that he must step forward and take their place. As the monstrous fist descended toward the vulnerable witch, he sprinted into action with reckless speed, thrusting himself directly into the path of the crushing blow to shield her. She gasped in sheer disbelief, her eyes widening as she uttered his name, stunned by his sudden and courageous intervention. Standing resolutely by her side despite his injuries, he raised his blade and declared with unwavering determination that they would defeat the beast together. Standing side by side amidst the lingering dust of battle, the young spellcaster looks down at her wounded companion with calm resolve, offering her full support to defeat the beast together. She points out that she failed to completely block the enemy's previous strike and urges him to rest, but the young warrior brushes off her concern, stubbornly claiming he is fine despite his battered state. Demonstrating extraordinary resilience, his body begins to rapidly mend itself, drawing gasps of amazement from his companions as he confidently assures them he will be fully healed in no time. Fueled by renewed energy, he steps forward decisively, asking her if 5 minutes will be enough to prepare a magic spell strong enough to destroy the monster in a single blow while he draws its attention. Adjusting the brim of her wide witch hat with composed grace, she accepts the challenge without hesitation, confirming that 5 minutes is more than enough time. With their strategy decided, she begins channeling her inner mana, causing a massive, intricate magic crest to manifest beneath her feet and expand across the shattered ground. Meanwhile, he turns his gaze back toward Bagar Heck, taunting the giant beast man into another clash. The monstrous primate grins menacingly, eagerly accepting the invitation. Without a moment's delay, the brave swordsman charges directly at the colossal foe, putting his life on the line to hold the line for his ally. He dodged beneath the beast's massive swinging fist, ducking through the barrage, but a glancing blow still sent blood spraying from his lips. Before he could recover, Bagar Heck slammed his heavy fists into the stone floor, sending shockwaves and debris flying around the overwhelmed warrior. The brute's relentless violence culminated in a devastating strike, tearing through flesh and bone without hesitation. As a result of the horrific blow, his severed arm flew through the air, streaming dark crimson. Staring in shock at the bleeding stump where his arm once was, he realized his time was rapidly running out. Knowing he could barely hold on for 3 minutes at this pace, and desperately willed his body to regenerate faster. To his utter astonishment, the limb rapidly sprouted back from the wound. Realizing that repeatedly suffering mortal damage had somehow accelerated his regenerative powers, he felt his chances of victory restored to an even split. Unfazed by the brutal cycle, the beast tore into him again and again, yet he endured every crushing impact, refusing to fall despite the horrific physical toll. Severed limbs littered the air in rapid succession as his body continued to tear apart and instantly regrow amidst the chaotic clash. Infuriated by his unnatural resilience, Bagar Heck roared that he was as persistent as a cockroach, prompting Metal to stay focused on her ongoing spell despite the monster's infuriating taunts. Embracing the insult with a defiant grin, He proudly declared that he would gladly become a cockroach if it meant protecting his friends, giving Metal full confidence as she continued casting. He suddenly caught his breath, stumbling as fatigue began to weigh heavily on his trembling frame. Struggling against massive blood loss, he knew he was reaching his physical limit, yet he desperately searched for a way to buy time and expand his arsenal. Seeing him wobble, the towering beast man taunted him, mocking the warrior's apparent exhaustion as he prepared to crush him. But in that precise moment, the shape-shifting blade Ataraxia reactivated, flying into action to alter the course of the battle. With the adaptive sword adjusting to its wielder's desire, clarity rushed back to his mind, allowing him to clearly read the beast's movements. Reinvigorated, he launched a swift counterattack that sliced straight toward Bagar Heck's face. Boundless agility returned to his limbs as he leaped into the air, raining down rapid, relentless strikes onto the hulking monster. Even as the beast growled and derided his persistent survival, the youth shrugged off the pain, declaring that the attacks no longer hurt him. Watching the fluid, unmistakable combat style from afar, Metal smiled with relief, realizing that her true companion had finally returned. Turning his attention back to his ally, Cross called out Metal's name, ready to finish the fight together. He had delivered his strike right on schedule, prompting the young spellcaster to note that finishing in precisely 5 minutes was entirely true to form as her magical spell detonated. The unleashed energy swirled into a breathtaking magical vortex high above the arena, casting its luminescence down upon the hulking beast who stared upward in stunned bewilderment. A massive pillar of explosive force shattered the distant structures, compelling Bagar Heck to marvel at the unbelievable magnitude of the strike. As the dust began to clear, he stepped out from beneath the crumbling stone wall, coughing through the haze while marveling aloud at the incredible power of her magic. Looking toward the collapsed ruin where their monstrous adversary lay completely buried under fallen debris, he realized that no one could possibly survive a hit like that, confirming their victory. With the threat silenced, she threw her arms tightly around his neck, holding him close as she poured out her heart, confessing how desperately she had longed to see him. Tears streamed freely down her face as she explained how agonizing those 10 long years of waiting had been, revealing that although living felt almost unbearable at times, she never stopped believing they would meet again. Burying her face against his shoulder with heavy, trembling sobs, she whispered a tearful, heartbroken welcome back. Wiping her eyes, she apologized for letting her lingering sorrow show, admitting it was foolishly self-indulgent when she knew how much everyone else cared for him too. Smiling warmly with tears welling in his own eyes, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder and expressed his deepest gratitude to her for keeping him in her heart through all those years. Holding the witch close amidst the settling dust, he whispered softly that he had finally returned home. Before the tender moment could last, a worried comrade rushed onto the battlefield shouting for his friend, only to halt abruptly in shock. Surveying the surrounding landscape, the companions stood horrified by the grotesque carnage and blood-soaked remains left in the wake of the spell. While the young demon queen realized these newcomers were allies who had come to help, the witch swelled with violent indignation at having her intimate reunion intruded upon. Before her darkness could consume them, the immense strain of her colossal magic caught up to her, causing her to suddenly collapse to the dirt. Dropping to his knees, he tenderly cradled her and urged her to rest, while the panicked allies scrambled with ropes, arguing nervously whether to bind the dangerous caster or attempt to talk reason into her. As sleep took hold of her beneath her dark hat, she closed her eyes in complete peace, knowing her long-lost sage was no longer just a vision in her dreams, but truly beside her in reality. Bound securely on the floor and letting out a casual yawn, the witch explained that she had been caught off guard when her companion suddenly collapsed unconscious before her. He stretched with a satisfied grin, remarking that it had been years since he had slept so deeply, though she dryly pointed out that he had only been unconscious for 30 minutes. Undeterred, the young swordsman offered to introduce Aura and the others, insisting that the demons were trustworthy allies. Continuing his passionate defense, he explained that the Demon King sought to forge a peaceful world where humans and demons could coexist without bloodshed, a noble ambition he was fully committed to supporting. Though the witch remained convinced inside her mind that he was merely being manipulated and taken advantage of due to his soft heart, he caught her skepticism and fiercely declared that achieving this dream was now his own personal calling. Realizing she could not sway his resolve, she gave a weary sigh and agreed to let the matter rest for the moment, causing him to smile with relief until her physical body suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving behind a decoy puppet. Shocked by her sudden escape, the young warrior cried out in dismay as he realized she was far from persuaded, while the slender demon lord stepped forward to reintroduce herself in proper fashion as Orafiel, ruler of the demons. Addressing the nearby presence of the hidden witch, the demon king proudly praised the young man, recounting how he had brought an end to the brutal war through the sheer strength of his spirit, earning the eternal respect of demonkind under the honored title of the Rainbow Sage. Refusing to let the demon act as an authority on her companion, the witch shot back that such accomplishments were merely a fraction of his true charm, leaving both the young warrior and the demon ruler breaking into a nervous sweat as they feared another magical outburst. He watched anxiously, asking if her magic was working, while Metal insisted that because she was the one who recognized him instantly, she understood him better than anyone and would teach them. Encouraged by her words, the young hero urged her to help convince Claude and the rest, confident that with her support, everyone would surely understand his vision. However, she lowered her head beneath the wide brim of her hat, expressing doubts about whether anyone would actually listen to or believe her. He refused to accept her reluctance, insisting it was impossible, while she silently wrestled with her own desires, realizing she would no longer have him all to herself if she agreed. Sensing her hesitation, he pleaded with her to return to human territory and persuade them, asking eagerly if she would support his dream. To his relief, she offered to help turn his dream into reality. But her composure suddenly broke into tears as she questioned why he was saying such things to her, leaving him stunned by her emotional outburst. She wept openly, fearing that he was trying to push her away or hated her for refusing to deal with Claude, begging not to be abandoned. Horrified by her reaction, he frantically reassured her that she was the only one he truly trusted and relied upon. Calming down slightly, she proposed a compromise. As long as they could meet regularly once a week, she would cooperate. He reluctantly agreed, sighing softly at her unexpected condition. Straightening her focus, she casually asked if she should simply incinerate anyone who resisted to finish the job quickly, causing him to frantically beg her to keep things strictly peaceful. As their chaotic dispute settled, Aura stepped forward to announce that the area's leader had been restrained, asking if he was ready to speak with him. She led the party to where the defeated beast leader sat bound in heavy chains before stone ruins. The hulking captive mocked their arrival, recognizing both the sage and the spellcaster standing beside him. The spellcaster noted that she had intentionally held back during their struggle to avoid dragging the hero into danger, while the monster expressed surprise that she had survived the encounter at all. Resigned to his fate, the bound beast man demanded they finish him off, assuming they had come solely to take his life. He questioned whether someone who had slaughtered countless humans could truly be forgiven, but the young warrior shocked him with a straightforward refusal to kill him. With unwavering determination in his eyes, the young man declared his vision for a world completely free of bloodshed and conflict. Outraged by such idealism, the beast scoffed at his naivety, loudly swearing that he would continue his murderous path the moment he broke free. Instead of faltering, the young hero offered himself as the sole target, inviting the monster to vent all his violence exclusively against him until he grew bored. He then decreed that the captive would be sent to prison to reflect upon his past actions, leaving the monster stunned by the sentence. Intrigued by the hero's unyielding resolve, the giant beast finally announced his true name, identifying himself formally as Bagar Heck. With a cold menace in his glare, he left them with a final threat, swearing that their next meeting would end with the young hero's demise by his own hands. With him securely bound and transport arrangements finalized, the group gathered together in quiet relief after the battle. Reflecting on his decision, the young sage wondered aloud if he had been too forgiving, though his companions offered mixed, affectionate banter about his soft heart. Turning to his magic-bearing companion, he offered his sincere gratitude and apologized for acting impulsively, but she simply reassured him with a warm smile that such mercy was true to his nature. He then turned toward the demon's sovereign and her guards, bowing respectfully to thank them for their critical assistance. To his surprise, the young demon king suddenly dropped to her knees in dramatic apology, blaming her own oversight for failing to adequately warn them of the realm's hazards. Regaining her footing, she soberly explained that the demon territory was splintered into opposing factions, with enemies lurking in every direction. She issued a grave warning regarding 4 individuals of terrifying power, urging him to flee immediately upon sight, since even she could not overcome them. Shocked by her intense warning, he urgently inquired about the true nature and identity of these 4 threats. Outside, as the dark night hung over the jagged mountain range, she prepared to name the formidable entities. Meanwhile, somewhere far across the domain, one of these legendary figures quietly downed a drink in the shadows. Standing resolute before his father's cross-shaped marker, Elias Galfort received word that his armies were prepared to march at a moment's notice. Tearful yet determined, the self-proclaimed Heavenly King swore to honor his lineage and bring his father's deepest ambition to fruition. Nearby, the smoking ruins of a shattered settlement stood as grim proof of their relentless doctrine, punishing any who dared to refuse their sacred teachings. Surveying the devastation she had wrought, Alice, known as the Devourer of Cities, clarified that her destruction stemmed from pure hatred toward peaceful lives. She took pleasure in forcing her faction's machine faith onto the remnants, infuriated by the mere existence of those who lived without suffering. Across distant, snow-covered mountain ranges, a giant draconic shadow glided under the starry night sky, accompanied by a small winged messenger. The dragon lamented the fallen, recognizing that Bagar Hek had chosen a path leading to his demise. The ancient creature grieved as their elite circle continued to thin. Contemplating their waning numbers, Viriria Garden pondered whether their line was simply destined for total extinction in this darkening age. Inside a secluded sanctuary, intricate astronomical instruments spun quietly, signaling that the entire realm was teetering on the edge of unprecedented chaos. Gazing into her glowing sphere, Prophet Araya Yui foresaw that Cross would stand as the pivotal axis of this coming storm, destined to bring about either total destruction or ultimate rebirth. Examining the fate of the young sage more closely, she noted an extraordinarily ominous star casting its shadow over his path, prompting her to peer deeper into his destiny. She burst into wild, ecstatic laughter at the catastrophic vision unfolding before her eyes, finding the young warrior's dark fate beyond amusing. Her ominous prophecy delivered a chilling truth. The one destined to bring ultimate destruction upon the world was none other than the young sage himself. High above the realm, the grand silhouette of the Demon King's castle stood quiet, where a monumental volume of administrative work had accumulated during the ruler's sudden absence. Inside, the young Demon King found herself utterly dwarfed by towering stacks of neglected parchment piled high across her desk. As she cowered beneath the paperwork, her head maid sternly scolded her for sneaking away without permission, refusing her even a cup of tea. Witnessing her distress, Cross kindly offered to help lighten the burden. Glancing out the window, he recalled how it had taken 3 whole days to part ways with Metal before he could finally return to the fortress. With a clipboard in hand, he resolved to pull his weight by checking the kitchen stock, eager to make up for the trouble he had caused. Unbeknownst to him, a witch lurked around the corridor corner, watching his every move with a tense, muffled grumble. She harbored severe doubts about the fortress, convinced that trusting demons was far too dangerous and that lingering malice might put her companion in grave danger. Walking purposefully down the hall, she swore to judge the castle's inhabitants with her own eyes to ensure his safety. She watched in secret as Cross warmly greeted a returning demon staff member, thanking the small worker for worrying about him and expressing relief that he had arrived back safely. Seeing the worker struggle under a massive load of cargo, he offered to lend a hand, cheerfully insisting that it would be a shame if such heavy boxes were dropped halfway to their destination. Peering from behind a hallway pillar, the young witch found herself touched by his selfless nature, quietly marveling at how genuinely kind he was to everyone around him. Throughout the corridors, castle servants gathered enthusiastically to welcome him back, eagerly inquiring about his well-being and asking if he had suffered any injuries during his recent exploits. After placing the heavy load securely on the floor, the grateful worker bowed in thanks, while Cross warmly reminded him never to hesitate to call out if he ever needed further assistance. His helpful rounds soon led him straight into the bustling atmosphere of the castle kitchen. Stepping up to the stove, he expertly flipped ingredients high into the air with a heavy wok, effortlessly serving up a perfectly seasoned, appetizing dish. Astonished by his culinary dexterity and swift efficiency, the head chef lavished him with praise, urgently pleading for him to become his personal apprentice. Wiping the sweat from his forehead with a light grin, he acknowledged that learning the culinary arts sounded tempting, but explained he could not take on such a commitment without full dedication amidst his current duties. Understanding his position, the head chef handed him a detailed list of supplies, assuring him that the offer remained open whenever he might reconsider. As he made his way outside, Metal stared in astonishment at the empty dishes, realizing in disbelief that the exquisite meal had been prepared by his hands. Outside on the balcony, target dummies stood lined up along the railing, catching the light of the morning sun. As the young swordsman walked into the yard, the demon guards greeted him with enthusiasm, calling out his name and eagerly asking if he had come to spar, though he warmly replied that he was assisting Aura today. They commended him for his bravery during the perilous mission, expressing deep gratitude for his protection of the Demon King, while modestly adding that such a duty should have been theirs to carry. Reassuring the soldiers, he insisted that their constant defense of the capital was just as vital, refusing to let them minimize their own dedication. He offered a bright, encouraging smile, explaining that Aura was only able to pursue her dreams because of her profound trust and gratitude for all of them, leaving the guards deeply moved, while Metal observed quietly from the shadows. Watching him interact so naturally with the demon folk, she felt a profound realization take hold. He had found a true sanctuary here, surrounded by affection that he never experienced among humans. Overwhelmed by guilt, she agonized over having taken away his rightful place, yet the terrifying prospect of parting from his side cut through her heart just as deeply. Before her thoughts could settle, a sudden, violent explosion shook the castle grounds, sending plumes of destructive energy skyward and throwing the guards into immediate panic. As alarms echoed throughout the corridors and the soldiers rushed toward their posts to safeguard the Demon King, he instantly snapped into high alert. He stood frozen in place, sweat dripping down his brow as he questioned her sudden and unexpected presence in the hallway. As the Beastmen guards urged him to flee to safety before she was discovered, his mind raced while staring back at the quiet witch. Before anyone could react, he swept her up into his arms and leapt high through the air, declaring that they needed to find a more private spot. Landing upon the steep tiled roof of the castle, he let out a breath, confident they would avoid detection up there. With privacy finally secured, she summoned the courage to ask what was truly on her mind, inquiring if he was genuinely happy residing in the Demon King's stronghold. Looking down, she admitted her deep desire to remain by his side, while simultaneously fearing that staying near her would bring him harm. Hearing her heartfelt doubts, his face broke into a broad, reassuring smile as he declared that he had never been happier than when traveling alongside her. Overwhelmed by his honest words, a deep crimson blush bloomed across her cheeks, and she softly asked if it was truly all right for her to be with him. High atop the castle, he answered without a moment's hesitation, telling her that he was the one who wanted to be by her side. Meanwhile, inside her quarters, Aura held her forehead in sheer bewilderment, wondering what absurd romantic scene was taking place right on her roof. She sat behind her desk, instructing Libel to report that the incident was resolved, while Cross apologized for the extra workload. With her task completed, the witch declared her intention to depart immediately, eager to grant Cross's wish. Refusing Aura's offer for discreet travel arrangements, she took to the skies, leaving both the Demon King and Cross mystified by her sudden exit. Shortly after, as Cross remained in her office, a sudden knock interrupted their quiet moment. An attendant entered hastily, bearing an urgent report that demanded the Demon King's immediate attention. The intelligence indicated that General Elias Galford had mobilized his forces, signaling an imminent military strike. Assuming the demon capital was the target, she began calculating defensive countermeasures and intelligence gathering. However, her aide urgently corrected her, emphasizing that immediate civilian evacuations were required instead. To her complete astonishment, the report revealed that Elias was not attacking her, but was marching his army straight toward human territory. Realizing the strategic nightmare, she wrestled with the impossibility of deploying demon troops into human lands without escalating the conflict further. As she weighed the agonizing political dilemma, the young sage spoke up, reminding her that only one viable choice remained. Adjusting his sleeves near the window, he stepped forward without hesitation, volunteering to ride out into the fray himself. With absolute conviction burning in his eyes, he asserted that he possessed the power to protect both demonkind and humanity alike. Elsewhere, an armored demon sentry shouted urgent news, announcing that the human heroes had launched another assault. Surrounded by his veteran commanders, the dissident leader openly mocked Aura's perceived weakness, declaring that they would carry out the violent will of their former demon king. With an intense, predatory gaze, General Elias Galfort swore to seize control over everything in his path. As they made their way through the rugged terrain, Cross pondered how many years had passed since he last set foot in the human territories, while Aura silently walked alongside him. He turned around to scold Gustar for trailing behind them despite explicit warnings, but the companion stubbornly insisted that his disguise was flawless for traveling through human lands. Unveiling a bizarre horse mask pulled tight over his head, the companion proudly displayed his makeshift cover, prompting Cross to blurt out that the absurd mask made him look even more like a monster. The masked companion then offered to carry Cross on his back to complete the horse disguise, but the young swordsman flatly rejected the idea, emphasizing the urgent need to keep a low profile. Reaching a high vantage point overlooking a sprawling settlement, Aura peered into the distance, confirming that they had successfully arrived ahead of their enemies at the targeted stronghold. Below them lay Deraldia, the grand frontline city and one of the massive strongholds of the human realm. As they took in the view, Gustar inquired whether Cross had ever been to this place before, to which Cross admitted that he had. Continuing down the trail toward the city gates, his companion deduced that Deraldia was a place bound to old memories for Cross, who softly remembered how Claude and his former companions had looked after him during those early days. A vivid memory flashed in his mind, reminding him of those bygone days when he traveled as a novice bearing heavy baggage alongside Claude's party. He recalled the heavy words once spoken to him, a solemn reminder of the immense trust placed upon his shoulders to stand as a true hero. As he listened to his companion reflect on the past, the young sage couldn't help but tease him about his surprisingly wicked nature, though Claude merely smiled, treasuring even the bitter memories of helping ungrateful people. He then turned his attention to a detailed map of the region, pointing out Deraldia's strategic proximity to the former Demon King's castle and explaining that its soaring walls and garrison were specifically built for heavy defense. In response to his tactical breakdown, the dark-haired warrior firmly rejected the idea that casualties were inevitable, determined to resolve the impending conflict without any sacrifices. He listened intently as Claude warned them about Elias Galfort, a formidable foe whose overwhelming magic and combat strength were capable of annihilating an entire city single-handedly. He suddenly recognized the dangerous bloodline, realizing that Elias was the son of Vrest Galfort, one of the legendary 4 heavenly kings who had been slain during the previous era by the hero's party. He learned that Elias harbored a deep grudge against humanity and commanded an elite force of veteran survivors from the former Demon King's reign. While Aura pondered the enemy's aggressive initiative, they weighed their limited options, acknowledging that peaceful negotiations were impossible and a direct head-on clash was reckless, leaving strategic action as their only choice. They agreed to separate, with Claude instructing everyone to scout the surrounding terrain and rendezvous at sunset, prompting Cross to eagerly dash off, while Aura reluctantly agreed to investigate on her own terms. With their scouting assignments set, the party dispersed into the dense forest surrounding Deraldia, knowing they would reconvene at dusk to finalize their strategy. Deep within the quiet forest, Claude walked alone, his mind heavy with doubt as he questioned whether he should have joined this reconnaissance mission at all. He could not shake the lingering thought that slaying their enemy's offspring would only perpetuate an endless cycle of hatred and revenge. Resolving to fulfill his duty despite his misgivings, he delivered a sharp slap to his cheeks to focus, only for a sudden human cry in the distance to shatter his concentration. Following the noise into a nearby clearing, the young strategist was horrified to discover a menacing, horned demon towering over a helpless child and her companion. Without a second thought for his own safety, he charged into the open, shouting fiercely for the creature to stay away from the innocent child. As the horned warrior slowly turned to face him, Claude caught sight of the distinct dark markings on the adversary's face, realizing the true gravity of the threat before him. Just as the beast swung his formidable weapon with brutal velocity, Cross leapt between them, raising his shape-shifting blade to absorb the crushing blow. Soaring into the air with lethal precision, the Dark General declared his true identity as Elias Galford, one of the legendary four Heavenly Kings, before driving his full force downward. Springing backward just as the devastating strike shattered the earth beneath him, the young swordsman created crucial distance, condemning his opponent's reckless assault. Assessing the surrounding woods, he reasoned that Elias was acting alone without a supporting army nearby, and decided he had to regroup with his companions immediately. His eyes widened in shock as he ducked behind a row of tree stumps, barely shielding himself from an immense wave of destructive force. The devastating impact tore through the surrounding forest, snapping massive trunks like twigs and sending a thunderous roar echoing through the woods. Observing the terrifying scale of destruction, he recognized the formidable prowess of the enemies present, realizing this threat operated on an entirely different level. Perched atop a high stump stood a wild, muscular warrior draped in animal pelts and bound in heavy chains, wielding a massive chained blade. Gauging the newcomer's aura, he placed his combat ability on par with Claude's formidable strength. Without warning, the vengeful attacker lunged downward, screaming that his strike was retribution for his fallen father. As weapons clashed, the young sage admitted to taking the father's life, but urgently pleaded for him to leave uninvolved civilians out of their conflict. The enraged warrior pointed an accusing finger, declaring that his mighty father could never lose to someone he deemed trash. The young sage gritted his teeth, realizing the situation was growing increasingly convoluted under the weight of misdirection and bloodlust. Driven by intense grief, the attacker vowed not just to slay his primary target, but to eradicate every single member of the hero's party. Willing to make a sacrifice, he offered his own life to settle the grudge if the warrior would withdraw his army, pointing out that their primary companions were currently elsewhere in monster territory. His desperate plea was answered with a violent strike, steel clashing against steel with a sharp ringing sound as the two combatants exchanged lethal blows. Slamming his heavy weapon down with crushing power, the beast warrior proclaimed that he carried the hopes and wishes of all who followed him, swearing that he could never back down. His ferocious blade came tearing through the air at blinding speed, leaving Cross with no time to evade the lethal blow. As the heavy weapon reached his throat, Cross braced himself for the end, certain that death was imminent. In a fraction of a second, an extraordinary counterstrike intercepted the assault, causing a tremendous explosion that sent the attacker reeling back. An armored ally stepped forward, explaining that her rescue was merely to spare her lady from sorrow, to which Cross could only offer a breathless word of thanks. Breathing a heavy sigh, Cross watched as his companion rushed over, exasperated that another violent confrontation had erupted so quickly. Before the clash could escalate any further, a young girl suddenly threw herself into the clearing, desperately begging both sides to spare the humans. Shielding the young warrior, she loudly demanded that they stop picking on him, prompting the supposedly fearsome opponent to quietly admit he had no real desire to fight either. Rubbing his neck sheepishly, the Beastman warrior confessed that his own followers had placed him on such a high pedestal that he felt forced to maintain a tough facade. Left completely speechless by this sudden turn of events, Cross and his companions could only stare in utter bewilderment. Across the picturesque town of timber-framed houses and grand spires, daily life initially unfolded under a deceptively peaceful sun. Within the bustling town square, hushed whispers began to circulate among the citizens, spreading unsettling rumors that the realm's hero had suddenly vanished without a trace. The townspeople debated the terrifying news, with one optimist suggesting the hero's disappearance must be part of a grander strategy, though others remained deeply unsettled by the loss of their protector. Before their conversation could proceed any further, a grotesque, towering abomination with elongated limbs and bulbous features loomed silently behind the unsuspecting men. Meanwhile, deep within the surrounding forest, an explosive shockwave shattered the silence as a heated argument broke out, with a vengeful youth blaming all heroes for his misfortune while his opponent fiercely defended his companions. The enraged warrior lashed out savagely with his giant chained weapon, screaming that the heroes were the sole cause of his agony. But his words met unwavering defiance as he was told that innocent people had nothing to do with their fight. Seeing the violent outburst spin completely out of control, a small young demon stepped forcefully into the fray, extending her arm to demand an immediate end to the conflict. Completely deflated by her stern reprimand, the hot-headed attacker whined about being singled out for punishment, leaving his dark-haired rival stammering in disbelief as the fight ground to a sudden halt. He questioned them about their relationship, watching closely as Aura bowed deeply to apologize for the Beastman warrior's reckless behavior. Despite the query, the eager warrior proudly declared them to be best friends, though Aura calmly explained that she had merely saved him when he collapsed from starvation. Continuing his story, he dramatically recalled wandering lost without food for 5 days on the verge of death until she saved his life, while she privately viewed him as little more than a stray dog. Shocked by this history, the young hero pressed further, asking if her presence was the reason he refused to attack humans, while the Beastman continued boasting about their unbreakable bond. Refusing to admit his true motives, the warrior snapped that he would never confess, but Aura openly revealed that he actually harbored a fondness for humans. Caught in a moment of embarrassment, he blurted out that he simply admired human clothing and its rugged style, ignoring her remark about monster craftsmanship being superior, which led the swordsman to question why he had engaged in violence if he liked humans so much. His expression turned grave as he explained that his actions were bound by duty, stating he could never betray the wishes and expectations of those who looked up to him. Hearing this logic, the swordsman reacted with frustration, asking if he had ever bothered to talk directly with his people and insisting that sharing honest feelings was completely different from betrayal. The young Beastman went quiet, carefully weighing the concept of clashing true feelings. Completely misinterpreting the advice, he excitedly concluded that he should simply trade physical blows with his comrades, leaving the hero shouting in disbelief that he meant a clash of words, not violence. He attempted to propose a temporary alliance, suggesting their goals aligned, but the young Beastman rejected the offer with disdain, scorning the idea of allying with a hero's companion while offhandedly mentioning that the enemy planned to attack the city the following evening. Curious about the term, the young girl asked what it meant to be a hero's follower, prompting the Beastman warrior to reveal his dark-haired visitor's identity as a former member of the renowned heroes group. She turned to him directly, seeking confirmation while pointing out that records only mentioned 4 members in the legendary party. Meanwhile, the Beastman firmly insisted that 5 figures were responsible for his father's death, leaving the young sage to give a hesitant, evasive answer. Instead of fear or hostility, her eyes lit up with wonder as she declared him the cool, phantom hero lost to history, a sudden burst of admiration that left him flustered yet secretly flattered. Shaking off the awkward praise, he quietly pondered inspecting the city's situation later, while the Demon Queen stepped up to suggest they plan their next steps together. Overhearing their exchange, the Beastman warrior abruptly announced he was joining them, catching the young sage off guard since he had assumed their paths would remain separate. A violent explosion suddenly shattered the peace, sending shockwaves and smoke rising directly from the direction of the city, prompting the furious Beastman to accuse him of deceiving them about the attack's timeline. He vehemently insisted on his intelligence, arguing that he had clearly heard the enemy state the evening of the 16th as their chosen hour. A brief, stunned silence hung over the group as the terrible realization collectively struck them. Realizing that today was indeed the 16th, the entire group burst into a desperate, full-speed dash through the forest toward the threatened city. As he rushed toward the heart of the settlement, the streets lay unnaturally silent and deserted, stripped of their usual bustle. Moments later, Chaos erupted as local guards scrambled through the alleys, frantically ordering the immediate evacuation of every citizen as top priority. Amidst the panic, a colossal monster loomed over a helpless bystander, declaring that vengeance would be exacted for Lord Vrest. Before the creature could strike, a massive iron-weighted weapon shattered the silence, slamming squarely into its face with brutal force. The behemoth collapsed to the stone pavement with a heavy thud, leaving the nearby soldiers gawking in sheer disbelief as they recognized the young master standing over the fallen brute. Standing tall amid the confusion, the fiery young warrior openly declared his opposition to the entire invasion, ignoring the bewildered demands of his comrades asking where he had been all this time. Swinging his heavy chain weapon into a furious arc, he challenged his own army, bellowing that anyone who had a problem with his stance was welcome to step forward and fight him. Panic surged through the ranks of the invading beastmen as they recoiled in terror, frantically whispering amongst themselves whether their young leader had turned against them or simply lost his mind. As several soldiers scrambled to retreat in the face of his rebellion, claiming no one could possibly stop the wild youth, a hardened veteran officer glared at the fleeing ranks in stern disapproval. Drawing his curved blade with cold precision, the veteran officer declared unyieldingly that he would never permit a retreat during an operation, no matter what chaos ensued. As the young beast warrior stood frozen in disbelief, the veteran commander confronted him directly, demanding to know why he was turning against his own allies. The officer reminded the young master of his father's overarching ambition, but the rebellious youth insisted that something far more vital was now at stake. Unmoved by the boy's defiance, the commander slowly reached for the hilt of his weapon, remarking coldly that a harsher hand should have been used in his upbringing. In a flash, he unsheathed his blade, pressing the cold steel directly against the young master's throat to seal his swift reprimand. Frustrated that he was being denied a fair combat, the young beastman glared in defiance, but the officer paid no heed and declared him a traitor to all troops, commanding the army to fulfill their ultimate directive and eradicate the city. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the crumbling streets, Cross slashed effortlessly through an attacking monster, carving a path through the onslaught. Sprinting past burning debris, he struggled against the dread of arriving too late once more, desperately searching for any civilians who might still be saved. Hearing a faint sob, he discovered a young girl huddled weeping on the pavement with a bleeding arm, unable to flee the approaching destruction. He immediately turned toward a nearby residence, raising his voice in an urgent plea for anyone inside to assist the wounded child. In response to his call, the doorway creaked open, and a quiet figure emerged onto the threshold. Relief washed over the young warrior as he urged the stoic man to take the child and flee to safety, unaware of what this silent bystander might do. He had barely handed over the child when a sudden, searing pain bloomed in his back. The civilian he had just tried to help drove a hidden blade straight into him, screaming in fear for the young warrior to get away from their child. Reeling in disbelief, he watched as blood quickly saturated his garments around the deeply embedded knife, his attackers' knuckles white as they spat out the word monster at the very savior who had fought to rescue them. Cross stood amidst the open plaza, observing a young townsperson holding a knife as a crowd began to assemble. Before him, a group of ordinary citizens gathered together with simple blades in hand, their expressions filled with grim determination. Inspired by a recent victory, they broke into eager shouts, celebrating that an ordinary person had managed to defeat a monster and insisting that they were all capable of fighting. As the excitement spread throughout the square, more townspeople rushed forward with improvised weapons, declaring they would defend the city even without the help of trained knights. Observing their dangerous overconfidence, she questioned how to handle the hot-headed mob, fiercely rejecting her companion's blunt suggestion to subdue them while the crowd chanted their resolve to protect their home. Stepping into the center of the commotion, he raised a hand to interrupt their chants, reminding the startled townsfolk that he was still very much alive. He pleaded with them not to throw away their lives, explaining that inexperienced civilians stood no chance against monsters, but the hostile man with the knife snapped back, refusing to believe someone he accused of looking down on humanity. Seeing his words rejected, she stepped forward to address the crowd, loudly proclaiming that they could trust him because he was Lord Cross from the hero's party, returned in a new form to save them. She had thrown the crowd into complete confusion with her revelation. The townspeople muttered among themselves, questioning who this Cross person was, dismissing the idea of reincarnation as a fairy tale, and wondering if the hero's party ever contained a fifth member. Suddenly, her memory sparked as she blurted out that she finally remembered him. He was the deadweight who barely deserved to be called a party member. Beside her, he slumped in exasperation, amazed that everyone had forgotten him despite all the harsh criticisms in the past. Yet in reality, he was the unsung protector who had fought tirelessly, slaying monsters in secret and reassuring the panicked citizens with a resolute vow to keep them safe. Holding his hands up in a gentle gesture of peace, he explained to the hesitant crowd that there were two monsters present who genuinely cared for humanity and wished to protect them. Before the crowd could process his words, a massive giant crashed into the area, driving an enormous fist straight toward the ground with violent impact. The towering monster directed its crushing blow toward the young beast warrior, aiming to obliterate him where he stood. Without breaking a sweat, the young warrior casually swatted the giant's massive fist away with a simple flick of his wrist. With a fierce glare, he began to taunt his attacker, confident that no beast of that caliber could ever stand a chance against him. Challenging the behemoth to hit him with everything it had, he braced for the next heavy slam, only to react with sudden shock as a powerful aura materialized right beside him. A heavily armored knight leaped from above, swinging a massive blade in a swift diagonal strike aimed directly at the beast warrior. He urged the elderly opponent to simply go home, declaring that he had no desire to fight him, especially after neutralizing the surrounding troops without taking a single life. Yet the old veteran refused to yield, insisting that the battle was far from over. Reminding the youth of past tactical wisdom, the old knight stressed that to force an invading force into retreat, one must eliminate the enemy commander directly. Acknowledging that his former pupil remembered the lessons well, the veteran lunged forward, his blade flashing in a swift strike. Slamming his heavy weapon down, the young warrior knocked his elder opponent off balance. As the knight declared that the annihilation of humanity was Lord Vrest's ultimate goal, the beast warrior retorted that his father never harbored such malevolent desires. Memories of his late father resurfaced, echoing words spoken in quiet moments past about his true appreciation for human civilization. The giant king had envisioned peaceful coexistence, teaching his son that neither race was superior or inferior, merely different, and that human lives should never be needlessly destroyed. In those fond childhood memories, his father had even brought back small treasures from human lands, sharing them in secret while fondly mocking the old knight's unyielding stubbornness. Returning to the sharp clash of steel in the present, the young warrior berated the old veteran for his relentless stubbornness, frustrated that the cycle of war always led back to mindless aggression. A devastating strike suddenly rent the air, piercing through the old knight's defenses with brutal force. Coughing up blood, the fallen knight urged his former student to strike him down without hesitation, claiming that ending his life was the only way to achieve his true heart's desire. He stood firm against his former mentor, recalling every memory of their shared past as he declared his fondness for humans and his refusal to let them be slaughtered. Yet, as he raised his blade to strike, a sudden weight held his hand back. Try as he might, he simply could not bring himself to deliver the final blow. Intervening at that critical juncture, the young sage drew his blade between them, insisting that taking a life was wrong. He reminded the beast warrior that they were family, urging him to channel his resolve into dialogue rather than violence until true understanding was reached. Relief washed over the young warrior as his heavy weapon clattered to the stone floor. The stark realization settled in that he was not bound to execute the old knight after all. Watching the tension dissolve, the black-haired sage noted that he had been advocating for a peaceful discussion from the very beginning. Turning his attention directly to the wounded veteran, he offered himself as the sole target if vengeance was truly desired, refusing to let the boy carry such a crushing burden. Though irritated by the sage's persistent interference, the old knight grumbled begrudgingly, remarking that his former master would never have lost to someone of his standing. With the duel concluded, The beast warrior inquired about the fate of the townspeople and his comrades. The sage quickly reassured him that everyone had been safely evacuated without a single loss, playfully admitting that his opponents had proven far tougher than he anticipated. Preparing to depart the battle-worn grounds, he suggested they lead everyone out of the settlement, confirming that their allies were already assisting with the ongoing evacuation. Before they could take another step, agonizing screams echoed violently across the surrounding area. Panic seized them both as horrific cries filled the air, leaving the sage shouting in confusion at the sudden catastrophe unfolding around them. While he and the others stood startled by the sudden commotion, Alice appeared in the quiet alleyways, holding her dark parasol aloft as her name was called out. Looking down with dark, hollow eyes, she coldly concluded that everyone around her was completely useless.